And black snow cabin.
Yeah, just.
On the sidewalk.
We go to the day trip.
I heard about it.
Yeah.
We'll get it fixed.
Okay.
I like, we did the west side of the state and side, San Juan for first. We get.
Hey, everybody.
Okay. Me, like, it's tourist pressure. The other part.
Okay, it's 6 o'clock and I'm gonna call this Lacey City Council work session to order. We do have an agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
Move to approve the agenda as published. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
So anyone opposed? That motion unanimously carries. We have an approved agenda. I just also want to say, today is National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. So thank you to the chief. Please let all of our law enforcement know how much we appreciate them. And with that, let's go into our first agenda item, which is our State of the Streets report. Right.
Yeah, so Brad Veteran, engineer extraordinaire, does all the work, puts it together, he's gonna give a presentation.
All right, in lieu of Aubrey, I'll be giving this presentation. For those that don't know me, Brian Patron, I'm a civil engineer for the city, also double as the pavement manager, so I'll deal with this report today, and we give you the 2023 State of the Streets report. I see we have some new people here. The purpose of this is to keep the council and the citizens informed about how our roads are performing. This is used as a tool where combined with a program called Street Saver. We'll punch in all of the data, run some analysis on what funding we need. And then based on that, it's up to the council and the citizens and our funding levels, what we want to do with the roads, what performance level we want to see. If we're too rich, we can always cut back funding. If we're too poor, we can always try to add funding by whatever means, and that goes into stuff like the TBD, where that's just a funding source. And this is more or less like an informative thing where we just put it in front of the people and the council just to be good suitors. Our current pavement conditions, our average PCI score of the network is an 84.4, which is good and on the cusp of very good. Compared to other municipalities, this is very good. Most older places you see, they're generally in like the upper 60s, 70s. If you go to very large cities that have older infrastructure, you might even see 50s across the board. Our network currently consists of 181.3 centerline miles, 419.7 lane miles. 96.4% of those miles are in very good or good condition. And then 3.6 of those miles are in fair or poor condition. Here's a chart that shows our pavement condition over time. Generally, it's hovered between 83 and 84. So our funding, our treatments, our programs, adding to the network has buoyed it a lot, where we bring in these new neighborhoods and obviously they come in at 100. So all of these new streets buoy it, which also you have to maintain. So it brings that number up, but also down the road, it may end up bringing the number down if you don't adequately treat them or adequately fund your network.
Can you talk about the footnote here?
Yeah, in 2016, we used a program, well, we used it forever, but Street Saver updated, they combined raveling and weathering into one. And in doing that, it separated it out where more you put into weathering, the less impact it had on PCI. So when they were combined, if it had a little bit of weathering, weathering is considered a little bit less severe than raveling. Where raveling, you have a lot of material loss, and weathering is just Mother Nature working at the fines on the surface. And until you get to a high grade of weathering, it really doesn't have that much of an impact on your PCI. So it's just the split of that. Here's the map for the city. You can find it in the report itself on map 8. It's map 8-1. The thing to note about the map is there's very minimal yellow and red in our network and a lot of blue, which is what you want to see.
We see blue.
For new additions, in 2022, we annexed an area near Lake Lois. In that, we added a chunk of Pacific Avenue, Carpenter Road, 6th Ave, Lake Lois, Kingwood Street, and a cul-de-sac. Kenneth, here's a breakdown of what we added. Carpenter Pacific arterials, Kinwood's a collector, all the neighborhood streets are residentials. Like my PCI of what was added was a 77.9, and with this addition, we added about 4.46 lane miles. New developments are big in Lacey. They pop up every year, it feels like, which buoys our network, but also, 20, 25, 30 years down the road could be a boon if we don't maintain them. There is Nisqually Place off of 31st, Bradley Park in between 15th and 6th Avenue, there's Sleepy Kinney over here. And then Novell Court off of 15th and Century. Century Place is our right of way. Obviously, with a new road, it's gonna be 100 PCI, and with this, we added 1.80 lane miles. This year I took some time to go through our network, went through all of our right of way and sort of compared if there was a street in our right of way that wasn't in the network, I added it, which there was a chunk of Carpenter north of Britton Parkway that was ours that was never added to our network, and a court called Helms Court off of 32nd and Carpenter that was part of our network. It just wasn't in Street Saver yet, so I made sure that it was added.
So is it that part where like when you get to Britton Parkway and you can go straight up that little mound and you kind of like wonder what's back there?
It's weird because if you go on Britton Parkway to Carpenter there, you go from city to county, and then you take a right on Carpenter and you're still in the county, and then there's an isolated section of Carpenter that's ours. And then once you get through that, it's county again.
It's the area where Cuyo Park is on either side of.
Yep.
Yeah, I've always wondered what was back there.
So we're responsible for that chunk there, but if we ever wanna do any rehab of the project there, I'm sure we'll try to get the county involved, or they'll try to get us involved just to make it a complete street.
What you're thinking about is on Britton Parkway before you get to Carpenter on the right, right?
Yeah, so like
Yeah,
when
that's
Carpenter
a, that's a
ends-
maintenance, that's a,
Oh, yeah, I was thinking
yeah.
Well,
how Carpenter's offset, where it's like you're
Track
going
where the roundabout's gonna be, it's that where
Yeah,
the
yes,
residence
yeah.
was.
north of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
look at where the roundabout is gonna
Yeah.
be.
Correct.
So there's that's a City Lacey facility back there. I think it's a
For the lift station?
lift station and
Oh, yeah.
I'm not
Yeah,
100%
down the hill.
Yeah.
Carpenter going there and-
Yeah.
you can see that road, but you can't, yeah.
You don't know what's back
Yeah,
there.
well, yeah, it's City Lacey.
Yeah, so you go city, county, city.
Yeah.
There's a couple spots like that. They're anomalies, but we have them.
Pretty good view there.
Here's a map also in the report that shows all the new roads in summary. It shows the new road history, what was part of the original network when Lacey was incorporated, as well as a lot of date ranges. The ones in the red box are the ones that were added in 2022 and 2023. We do road maintenance, especially with the TBD, where we wanna upkeep our roads, we wanna keep our roads in good shape. It's cheaper to maintain good roads. And when you have the funding levels to fix the bad roads as well, you wanna mix those in, because once they get to a certain level, they can become unsafe. If you're missing pavement, missing chunks of pavement, the striping's poor, other factors where there's less slip friction to roads that have exposed aggregate, or there's more slide to your car when roads have less of those fines, so we like to maintain them. First project is the 2022 overlay in the red boxes there. We did 3 portions of Marvin. There was Galaxy and Quinault, the roundabout, 14th, the little road that goes into the Walmart there, Campus Highlands Drive, Royal Street off Sleater Kinney, Nelson down here, and then the Arbors neighborhood Rainy Road pavement repair down by the trestle. That was from a weather event that flooded the street.
Like the picture of the very poor PCI. Is that from Rainier Road?
The picture that I put in there for the, yeah, where it's a lake, essentially a lake and coming up. Yep.
So when you do this work, let's say on Morven, Galaxy, Canal Arbors, are you bringing the road paved X back up to 100 or what are you bringing it to usually?
A new road's always gonna be 100.
Okay,
It shouldn't have any distresses, and if it does, it's an anomaly error in construction, so.
okay,
It's just when you do preventative maintenance technique, like a slurry seal or chip or scrub or what have you, where it's very likely gonna be 100, but it can end up being close to 100 just based on pre-existing
we
conditions.
don't do a lot, do we do slurry seals and
We do.
We do slurry seal.
We did one in 2021.
where at?
That would have been down in Thornbury.
Okay,
That area. We did, I believe it was 14.5 lane miles, something like that. Don't quote me on the exact number, but it was quite a bit.
that was within a neighborhood though, we don't do
Yes.
it on our arterials.
Not typically, no. It doesn't hold up to heavy traffic. There's different types of slurry seal too. Generally in residentials, you do type 2, which is a certain thickness. And then there's type 3s that exist where you can put them on collectors and arterials. It's a little bit thicker, holds the test of time a little bit better. But also it can be a little rough and rocky and reduce the ride quality, be a little noisy and it's not necessarily a bad technique if you wanna just limp a road along and get it by, but it's not per se the way you should
Yeah.
do it. But you very well could, and there are examples where municipalities have slurried a arterial street and it's held up, but for the most part, when you're dealing with an arterial street, slurrying it takes like 4 to 8 hours to cure, depending on the environmental conditions. So a lot of times you don't have that time
Sure,
where you're closing down a lane for that long, so they gravitate towards what's called a microsurface, where it cures in 15 minutes to a half hour. It's just a different type of break. Instead of a water cure, it's chemical.
Mhm.
So they'll do that, and then you can also do multiple passes of a micro as well. So it's like you can get a little bit more thickness on it because of the cure time versus slurry. If you want to do multiple passes, you'd have to have it closed down for 2 days.
got it.
And that's just not feasible. And there's chip seals, other types of seals. I could explain on and on, but I'll cut myself off here. 2022 overlay utilities was 7th Avenue, Golf Club Place, Frown Street, as well as 14th. Carpenter Road improvements was the section of Carpenter, South Pacific, in front of the bus barn and through land. Mullen Road sewer improvements, the new county roundabout east to the train trestle, near the train trestle. 2023 overlay phase 1, you had Rainy Road, the roundabout 66th, Emerald Hills, section of 34th, and Carpenter Hills Loop. I'll go into each one of these in a little more detail here. 2022 overlay, we did 5.18 lane miles of improvements. We put down fiber reinforced HMA, generally resists early onset cracking, slightly more resilient. And we put down 11,800 tons, as well as new striping, pavement marking at a cost of about $2.5 million. There's a lot of pictures to show construction both during and post. Marvin Road on the left, I-5 Galaxy Canal roundabout on the right. A lot of this was done at night because these are major streets. There's not much residential nearby, so we're allowed to do it. A lot of times it's a lot easier. Contractor sometimes likes it, sometimes doesn't, depending on what it is, where it is. Galaxy on the left, Canal Drive with the I-5 shields on the right. Nelson on the left, Campus Highlands on the right. Sample of the Arbors neighborhood and Royal Street going into that shopping center there. Next up is the Rainier Road pavement repair. We did 0.15 lane miles. This was due to a weather event that damaged the road, flooded the street. We had delamination between 2 lifts of asphalt, started to come apart and crumble. You'll see some nice pictures after this actually. We did 6 inches of fiber reinforced mat, 625 tons, new striping, pavement markings. In conjunction with this, we fixed 2 poor patches on Mullen, and this came in at $275,000. There's a picture of Rainier by the trestle. Mother Nature decided it's supposed to be
there for years.
So you added 6 inches to the road,
We ground it all out and then put
So
back 6
you
inches.
end up about even then.
Yeah,
So there's
that's
no-
the goal, especially when you have curb to match to. It's like whatever you grind out, you have to put back because you have defined match points. And you want the water to, well, here, I guess there's a little bit more going on where south of the trestle. There's a water base or watershed basin where when we get a lot of rain, unfortunately, it will come up this road and it can and will do it again.
It's a complicated hydraulic.
Yeah.
And we made some modifications in 2009. It's only flooded like this twice in 16 years. But it's not a simple fix.
I was curious whether we could
It's
lift
no
the
fix.
level of the road to avoid future flooding, and I'm sure that's a very rudimentary question, and the answer is probably no for a
Well,
host of reasons. but-
There's 2 main things. One is you have the railroad there, so if you raise the asphalt level,
Get even more
then you have less
trucks getting
clearance.
crunched by the trestle.
And then the other thing is if you raise the level and you push the water back further, then you're causing flooding upstream at a greater extent than it did before. Yeah.
And we did some research into what type of base to put down underneath this road too, or a lot of it is the hydrostatic pressure underneath where it pushes up on it, cracks it, does a lot of damage, you get a lot of delam. So we reduced the amount of fines in our base course on this, so it doesn't push against your road as much. But obviously, when the water table is on the bottom of your road, best
so much you
practice
can do.
might not be good enough, so,
Yeah.
but we did everything we could.
Any diversionary construction, like, like.
Oh, they were excellent, right up until the point that the people pull them out of the way and go right through it. If that's what you meant, not diverting the water.
Water diversion. Ah,
No,
It's-
no,
It's
there's no.
unfortunately a very significant
Yeah.
amount of water that comes
So
up
when
there.
it flooded in 2008, we did dam across the road with sandbags just to keep it moving. But with that said, all that groundwater is, I mean, typically when this happens, that big Horizon Point pond is, flooded. So I mean, the even though,
The water table's so high there.
if you shove the water and prevent it from going on the road, the groundwater is still high.
And there's a berm over here by this neighborhood too, where if you took it out, you'd flood these guys and that would not end
We went
well.
over all those things in the transportation committee. We got to bilge pump.
just put them up there.
That's how many
Need a really
different
big
things
pump
that
to
we.
keep up
Pump
the
the
water
lake.
table went across it.
Yeah.
Will this type of damage happen every time this happens?
Not necessarily.
The road was already starting to delam, so.
If it doesn't have any cracking on the surface, it should hold together. It'll move as one piece, but obviously there's theoreticals and there's what actually happens. So it's like there's a chance of delam, but if it does, then odds are it should stay together because
Where's this
asphalt's
water-
very pliable early on.
Where's the stormwater going?
It flows, all the way down ultimately to the Deschutes.
Mhm.
But we took a look at the downstream, like, can we open the
Yeah.
downstream up? And we really can't. It's still like pushing a rope.
Okay,
So we looked at all the various.
increasing the
options.
size going downstream, yeah.
And the reason that we dammed that in 2008 and didn't this time is because that berm that's there that prevents the water from going down to those homes down below.
Mhm.
Not the one you see in the background, but there's some
Yeah.
lower lying ones. That didn't exist, so the water was coming up the road and then flowing right down in there and it flooded that area. So,
That was the original floodplain before those two homes.
Yeah. uh,
Interesting.
but we've looked at all the options and we can live with this once every 15 years.
Good.
And here's a picture of
Mhm.
what it did to the road. I'm surprised these chunks actually held together. But there were 1 or 2 of these where there's still a mat underneath there. It's just the top lift that popped off. People drive on it. Obviously, it's not adhered to the lift below, so it just crumbles and goes wherever. And if you've seen it lately, it looks like a normal road again. Next up is the 2022 overlay utilities. This was 2.17 lane miles. Once again, put down 6 inches of fiber reinforced mat, 7,500 tons, new striping, pavement markings. This one was in conjunction with the utility. So it was funded jointly between TBD dollars and utility dollars. There are water line improvements along all of these corridors. On the left, there's 7th under construction, 14th finished state on the right. Brown Street under construction right in front of the fire department. We had special accommodations for them where we constructed in 2 stages in front of their driveway, so they always had access where if an emergency response vehicle needed to leave, they always could. So we were mindful of that. Carpenter Road improvements is next, 1.52 lane miles, fiber reinforced mat again, 7,200 tons, new striping markings. This was also a water line replacement. We have a transmission main going through there, very, very large one. And this was 3.5 million jointly funded between DVD and utilities. The picture of the mat getting put down, and on the right is striping operations. Mullen Road sewer, 0.76 lane miles, 6 inches of fiber reinforced mat, 2,100 tons, new striping marking as always. This was a sewer line replacement, so it was funded jointly between our sewer utility and TBD. And on the right is during construction, on the left is the.
So just so you're aware, there's a development project, big single family residential to the east along Mullen. And they're gonna be bringing a sewer down Mullen Road all the way down to the railroad trestle.
Oh, wow.
And so if you see construction this spring, this coming spring and summer, it's tied to that development.
Yeah, we left a blow off out there for them to connect to, or pick a bunch of port, but they'll tie into that when they eventually come down.
Have we figured out it's not, I know it's not our issue, but the flooding that happens right there as well?
We probably can't control that one either. Whatever Mother Nature wants to do. I know it's a low point. Water goes over the road all the time.
They did something there that made that one better than.
Yeah, it used to flood every time it rained.
Just like down on Rainier Road, the biggest challenge is that trestle. You have limited what you can do in there.
Oh, that trestle gets hit all the time as it is.
Yeah.
And you can't live that road.
When they connected, is our main gonna be sized enough to handle all that? I'm just sure it would.
Yeah, there is a sewer line that goes across there right now, but it doesn't have the capacity for this new development. So they're upsizing all that.
That's a big new development. It's like several hundred homes. isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Overlay phase 1 was 5.28 lane miles, fiber reinforced mat, 12,000 tons, new striping markings, minor stormwater improvements in a few locations, and this cost us about $3 million. Rainier Road, Rainier Valley Street roundabout, 66 as they're striping at 34th. There was a spot of sunken pavement where somebody actually launched their car into another car. So we decided to go out there and fix that because we love safety here and we don't want people to potentially die on our roadways.
So we must have been speeding too, for that to happen.
Speaking of safety on 66, is there be like a potential diverter there, or is there still some action or work that is maybe in place to bring the speed down on that road? I know that was an issue that somebody had brought forward.
I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, the kind of the advocate for that went away. We weren't able to get a sponsor for it. So it's
Long straight stretch of road.
sitting on a shelf right now.
People like to use
Oh,
those
excuse
on the
me,
bus.
66.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was thinking of the other one. Yes,
Oh.
that's moving.
That is moving forward. You were thinking the one in Thornberry, Lake
Yes,
Point-ish?
yes.
Emerald Hills redid all the roads in that neighborhood, fixed the stormwater issue at a corner where it wasn't draining and it was damaging the roadway. Carpenter Hills Loop had a lot of organics in it. I went in there, had a lot of soft spots underneath the road, put down new base, fixed the road, should last a while. We implemented our crack seal program this year. It's the pilot year. We coordinated it with our street maintenance department. They go out, give me a list that they want to crack seal. Get done what they can get done with their funds, and then we contract out the rest to try to get it done. This ensures all the streets in need of crack seal aren't deferred. It's cheaper to maintain good roads, and to keep roads good, you gotta keep the water out. Once water gets in between lifts of roadways, it's generally bad, especially when it gets, well, if there's only one lift of road and it gets into your base, softens your base, then you see a lot of those elevated failures, like when you see the cracking interlock, it's called alligator cracking, and that's usually signs of a base failure. And generally, the only way to fix that is you have to dig it out or redo the road if it's more widespread.
More sand.
No.
Please.
What the?
In the crack seal.
Or more sand, I thought you
Yeah,
meant sand under the road, I was like,
Sand in the crack seal, right?
it's a component, yes.
Okay. Is there like a limit to how much you can put in there or something?
It's generally a mix based on specification and use case. Where
And the
I'm not 100% sure the amount of sand that's in it, but there's certain manufacturers that make different products for different applications. Where it'll have a different sand content versus asphaltic content versus
Yeah.
whatever else goes into it.
I brought this up, to Scott about, crack sealing along, Pacific Avenue on the one-way.
Mhm.
Between, after the roundabout, like in front of, St. Martin's University. All the crack sealing is like going in a certain direction.
Yep.
And when a certain time, like at dusk, when the kind of light hits on it, you have no idea like where the lane is compared to, you just like, I think I'm in the lane. Then you look down, I'm like, no, I'm not in the lane, I'm in the cracks, I'm in this
Yeah.
invisible crack seal lane
And when it
instead.
rains too, it's kind of
It-
tough.
yeah.
That's what happens when RPMs go dull and get old to the raised pavement markers, where
Yes.
they lose their reflectivity, and when it rains, you see them even less.
So
So
I
it
think,
generally just needs a striping refresh
Yeah.
at that point.
so I think we need a striping refresh on that. I'm not the only person who's noticed this. I've had a couple of constituents say, what are you gonna do? Blah, 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 blah. It's like, oh, I'll bring it up. And so,
Yeah, Martin's, I mentioned it to Martin, he's
Yeah.
driven it multiple times
Mhm.
during the day, different lighting conditions. And then he spoke to Jordine, the senior tech in charge of the signs and markers, and the majority of the raised, reflective pavement markers, are of quality, we wouldn't replace them at this point in time.
mhm.
So until we go in and do a grind overlay on that road,
Mhm.
there's not a whole lot we can
Can
do.
we do something about the actual mark, instead of the markers, but restripe the lines?
Well,
Make it a little more-
our whole system is on, Lacey, all Lacey arterials are raised pavement markers, which are superior to the striping in the rain.
Yeah,
So that's, why we gone that route.
yeah. It's the
Yeah.
crack seal is what's made the difference. I just know it's hard. It seems like it's a safety hazard. And so, it's something to think about, because I know how tough it is
Yeah.
to look at it.
Yeah.
You're on a motorcycle, you're dodging crack seals, especially if the rains.
And they actually have good slip friction now. A lot of crack seal is designed for slip friction. And the mastic patches that you see out on our streets, those have good slip friction too. So they should be generally safe for a motorcycle to traverse. The goal is to keep people safe. We try to put safety first. Crack seal generally raises your PCI by 2 to 5 points depending on the density of your cracks. We have a 200K budget on this every year. Try to.
See, I think the mayor's probably looking at the PCI for Pacific Avenue.
I am.
Can you give him a sneak preview on
It's-
where that's in the queue?
It's somewhat on our radar. The crack seal on that was put down recently. So generally, it's like you want it to run its course.
Sure.
And then do some sort of rehab technique where with that road at the stage it's in, we'd probably just grind and lay it. Crack sealing it again might not be feasible, but it depends on funds and workload and what we can get done as well. So it might not get done soon per se, but it's definitely on the radar.
And when we go in and do a grind overlay on that, we'll give it a road diet. There's one more lane than we need.
Mhm.
And so we don't need to be, rehabilitating more asphalt. And And that was also a recommendation in the Depot District. Well, you know, we might convert it to parking lane or something, but
Or, yeah, all that, okay. Well, I appreciate the crack seal. I just noticed that as an issue that has happened after the crack seal, which is, you know, doesn't feel quite as,
Unintended consequence.
it's an unintended consequence.
And a lot of times when RPMs do go bad, it's about time for a maintenance too. So it's, when the RPMs go bad, it might be right around the time where you're gonna grind and lay an arterial like that sees as much traffic as Pacific does. Here's a summary of the amount of work we did in the last 2 years. Spent about $13 million, did about 15.06 lane miles, put down about 41,000 tons of mix.
How long has the Pacific been one way?
When the Pacific Avenue turned,
2000, 2001?
I think 2000 is when they built a couple of.
jeez. Wow, first time gone. It feels like it just happened.
This figure shows all the numbers since COVID. Asphalt costs have been all across the board. And depending on when you get projects out, you get a better price if you get them out early versus late. And sometimes we're not so lucky to get them out early enough based on staff time. Obviously, things come up during a project where it's like, hey, let's take a little bit extra to get this right before we send it out, because it'll cost us a lot more money to fix it in the field, do change orders, than it would be just to take the time to send it out a month later.
Where we're seeing asphalt prices right now, I see they've dropped from the high of 120, which was crazy.
I'd say on average, probably like 105, 110, if you're looking for a big paver. It all depends on your size of job too, where if you're under like, say 3,000 tons, you can see higher numbers. If you see a really small, like if you send out one that's 500 tons per se, it wouldn't be shocking to see like a 300 plus per ton of asphalt, just because it's place cost.
Yeah.
Where it's like at a certain point, the asphalt will control versus the cost of getting the equipment there, paying the laborers and whatnot, so just a numbers game. We run 4 budget scenarios here at the city through a program called Street Saver. Punch in all the data and it spits out dollar values, and it'll update the PCIs of the road based on a general degradation curve that updates itself from data that we entered. So every road has a specific way it's supposed to degrade, but Mother Nature says otherwise. Factors outside of our control say otherwise, so they don't necessarily follow that curve. That's why we go out and we analyze these streets and update the numbers manually just to give it a better idea. And that typical curve updates based on what you enter. So we have really good idea of how our roads are degrading through the years.
So just real quick, passenger vehicles versus large trucks.
One truck is about 2,000 passenger vehicles in terms of damage. So on your roads that have a large amount of trucks, that's why on, say, like, well, we don't control any freeways, but no, not freeway, but state highway. And that actually is the county's or the state's responsibility for the pavement, because it is a state highway.
So between
all the way to the roundabout.
Between the interchange, all the way to the roundabout, that's all the state?
Correct. They'd be responsible for that pavement. And
so in front of like Les Schwab, that's still the whole state, huh?
Yep. But Martin Way would be ours, even though it's very similarly traveled. It just doesn't have that designation. It's also an NHS route as well, so.
Yeah.
Share with the county.
So if it ever goes bad, then well, they should be on it, but we can always bring it up to them like, hey, this pavement's going bad, work with them. Not necessarily perform a design for their work, but we could if.
Sure. So then it's
necessary.
just to the roundabout, then after that, it's ours.
Because technically
They
it's-
follow the roundabout and go out to y'all.
Yep, because technically it's in our right of way, but we aren't responsible for the pavement itself.
Interesting, I didn't know that.
We run 4 scenarios. Scenario 1 is unfunded. We put $0 towards anything, see what happens. Just in case that ever happens. Hopefully it never does happen, because a person like me would be out of a job. And then scenario two, we updated it to $3.5 million a year. This is approximately what we've been spending lately through TBD funds. Scenario three would be to maintain the current PCI, and then scenario four is the unconstrained, where essentially whatever you put in the decision tree, it will do the second the road goes below that PCI level, which it will keep every road in good condition at that stage. A word of warning for the next slides, I did update our decision tree to be more in tune with modern pavement management techniques, did a lot of research, did a lot of recon, talked to a couple other municipalities, see what they had in their decision tree, updated ours, took out a lot of nonsensical stuff. It changed the numbers fairly drastically, but in the right direction, I'd say. So, I mean, obviously with the unfunded scenario, $0, your network's just gonna plummet. 2021 projection was a 65 if we did nothing. But this year's projection would be a 71 in 10 years. And we'd defer about $90 million in maintenance this way. Scenario two, which is about what we're spending right now, 3.5 million a year. This is based on DVD cash flow, like I said earlier. The projected PCI would be 82, so we'd see a drop, but not a very significant one. So in terms of being on target with the funding level that we want to see, this is right on point.
Is that adjusted for inflation?
Yes, yeah, Street Saver accounts for inflation, and you can punch in that number, which I believe I put in 5% this time, so it's fairly on the conservative side.
Are you also able to account for new projects that are coming online? You know, houses sold, revenue collected for said houses sold, and units, the amount of additional units that we bring on?
I mean, I could manually change it every year to update the value, but it's so much easier just to do one solid amount every year rather than figure out exactly what the TBD is or exactly what cash we have available to do maintenance at the time. So I mean, it'd be more accurate, but how much more accurate is it really worth the time is.
Cause we were talking about 100 houses coming online, a new project, and then, you know, I know that, what's his name has the mushroom farm under contract.
That's gonna be new roads in there and stuff.
Yeah, so,
And they're obligated to restore the frontage in front of their development too. So if that mushroom farm does develop, I believe it's DR for
it is.
they'd be obligated to do a half street in front of their property.
So
Still, for Stellicum, they'll,
which is cool and everything, but I'm thinking more along the lines of if there's 100 new houses in there. Each one of those is paying $500 in annual taxes.
Yeah.
And we, if, you know.
we bring in those roadways too, provided they're city streets and not private.
So
Yeah,
it's the growth,
the-
population growth.
benefit there is sales tax revenue, the portion of the sales tax revenue that goes to TBD.
Yeah.
For the excise.
Yeah, TBD is the sales tax.
No,
It's a sales tax.
not the REIT, so the TBD is funded by 0.2%.
Right, 20 bips on sales.
Yeah.
Okay.
So provided they shop in the area and spend money, technically we'll see money from it, but how much that is, it would be very tough to calculate. I can guesstimate.
So, yeah, what I'm referring to in terms of the homes, you know, is all the construction material and, you know, the sales tax generated from that.
Where this one diverged from 2021 is we were doing a $2 million a year spending and we were spending a lot more. So decided to bump it up to 3.5 to be more practical. With that funding scenario, we dropped down to 72. The maintained PCI scenario came out to about $4.6 million a year if we want to maintain that 84.5. So I mean, 3.5 versus 4.6 million per year being a 2-point drop in 10 years. I mean, I'm not one to say that 3.5 sounds a lot better at that point. It'd be nice to maintain it at 84, but being so high, obviously it's like a lot of your rehab techniques would be more preventative maintenance and you can only perform a certain amount of those on a street before you have to rehab it as well. So if we go in and we keep our residential streets good, we slurry them a couple times or chip or scrub seal, what have you. I mean, you could only do that a limited amount of times before you need to rebuild it. So Whether or not that 2 points PCI is a ton of difference is up for discussion, but I deem it as
It is
pretty
pretty
insignificant.
Same.
And then with the update of the decision tree, this is vastly different than the $7 million a year budget to maintain from 2021. We're changing those figures up, taking out the more nonsensical things, putting in more modern techniques, things that we'd actually do to these streets, changed it fairly drastically. And unconstrained, if we had unlimited budget, and we wanted to keep every road in that light blue category or better, we'd need to spend $6.2 million a year. Our projected PCI would be 87. Obviously, no money would be deferred. 2021, this was 11.2 million, which is obviously a lot more, but that was also part of the decision tree update and just knowing more about our network and knowing more about how Street Saver works and how to gear it towards more modern techniques and what we can do to our streets to keep them in good shape.
More or less just double our budget on the streets, right?
Yeah, just,
Look wide.
I mean, it'd be nice to have an 87, but also we need to have people to design these projects and get all this stuff
That's
out.
gonna be
Where
my question.
where
You
if it's
can't
me-
get it even above an 87, even with unlimited funds,
Yeah.
because you've only got so many people to do the work.
Exactly, where it's like, this wouldn't bake in like the amount of staff that you would need or how many jobs you'd need to vet out to a consultant to get done, so.
Where
This
does
is-
84 put us in the realm of, cities around the state?
I'd say
High end.
probably like the top
2%.
1%.
That's what I kinda
I'll just say
thought.
2%.
So 84 is probably a pretty good place to be.
So we'd be up there with Medina.
I don't know that we-
I mean, they might even be worse, I don't know, they're too busy building bigger homes than maintaining the roads. But yeah, like anything like 75 and up, you'd be higher than most places, so. And what's next? We have a lot of targets on our menu here for rehab projects. We have Yelm Highway down by the Trestle and Compton Boulevard. The Lake Crest neighborhood, that would also be in conjunction with a water project, 33rd Ave, 33rd Loop. In conjunction with a water project, 36 would be in conjunction with a water project. Clearbrook. There's some stormwater upgrades that need to be done there. That's been a target of ours for a while. Willamette Drive, portion between Hogan Bay and 31st is starting to get in pretty rough shape. And now that the lift station is finished and out of the way, we can probably go in there and do some work and bring it up to a better level of service. Obviously, through the years, it's seen more and more traffic than before, so it's taken a beating. 30th Avenue, the LeMay garbage trucks have been demolishing that for years now. And the Classic Heights neighborhood. For preventative maintenance, I'm planning on trying to get, well, the yearly crack seal program is something that's going to happen, but I'm planning on trying to get more preventive maintenance in terms of like a slurry seal or scrub seal or chip seal. It is something we do yearly based on a lot of our residential streets being on target for their first rehab cycle, where a lot of our streets were built between like 1990 and 2010. So a lot of those, it's cheaper to keep these roads good. And then if we can spend $2 a square yard on a slurry seal or $4 a square yard on a chip, it'll save us a lot of money versus waiting to get it rebuilt, which will cost you, I mean, right now, if you're doing a 3 inches, 2 inches of top course underneath, maybe a little bit of base, you're probably looking at like mid $30 a square yard. So, and there's also a figure in the State of the Streets report that kind of shows you, I forget what page it's on.
Is it 18?
Yes, that picture, is that 18? If you thumb to page 18, it shows you kind of like the maintenance cycle of a street and how much total you would spend if you just wait for it to go bad versus doing these preventative maintenance techniques and keeping it good, trying to buy yourself some time. And usually it's like upwards to 50% cheaper just to maintain these good roads. So I mean, if we let them go bad, maybe we need $7 million instead of 3.5 that we've been spending, so.
How to maintain the infrastructure.
A two-part question, maybe more for Rick and Scott. One is, are there any ways we can restrict the heavier vehicle traffic on what are primarily residential roads? A good example might be Linear Loop that cuts between Yelm Highway and Linear Road. You see an awful lot of large trucks going in the back into the QFC parking lot and servicing all those different restaurants and other small businesses in there.
It's,
Part ones.
it's not desirable to do because putting up signs, you know, is worthless without enforcement. And so then I guess we'd have to defer to the, say, is that the best of his police officers' time to patrol those areas? And we've had this discussion, you know, up in, you know, in the warehouse district and trucks crossing, you know, Campus Glen. And it's very few and it's very minor, and we posted it. But yeah, I mean, to enforce it takes time and resources against it, away from other things. And you know, that is an arterial. I mean, it's serving its purpose. And so can it be done? Yeah. Is it, you know, I mean, but you know, there's trade-offs there.
And your second question?
I was going to do that just with that particular case too, that's the access into those commercial establishments and trying to come into the driveway entrance off the arterials may be a little bit tighter and more problematic too, just functionality. That's what the center being designed the way it was.
So to stand up a commercial enforcement unit, you're looking anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000 in at least 2 years to get the training needed to get commercial enforcement officers to be able to do that properly, just like that larger vehicle on a consistent basis.
That to add officers, like.
We'd have to add officers because current staffing would not permit the staffing up of a commercial enforcement unit. That would be at least 2 additional officers plus the equipment plus the training.
So you could essentially rehab the street for that, then, okay. And the other part is, does the city get any consideration at all from, commercial vehicles for wear and tear on our streets, or is that just?
So in terms of the Northern Warehouse District, they do pay an extra truck trip fee. And it's designed, I mean, that was master planned that way.
Mitigation
for the-
fees.
Yes. That's not paid anywhere else. But, you know, in terms of roadway design, yeah, you have to have a lot of semis, a lot of big vehicles to make a difference. And honestly, the most damaging vehicles on the road are buses. So, you know, because of the weight and then in terms of how the load is distributed through the axles and number of axles, number of wheels.
But if we take a number of single occupancy vehicles off the road, because people
I
are
mean-
taking the bus, is there some trade-off? there?
No, you know, in reality, single light vehicles don't damage roads. That's the reality of it. It's the heavy vehicles that damage the roads. So I mean,
weather.
you could do a mathematical equation. So roadway design is based on ESAL, equivalent single axle load, which is a semi-load. So you could, you know, do the math and say a light vehicle equates to this many ESOLs. But in reality, light vehicles don't damage the roads.
Yeah, they're designed for millions of easels throughout their lifespan too. So unless you have like a million trucks come through there in 40 years, it shouldn't really impact it. Unless, say, it's 2 inches of pavement, then it could damage the structure. But generally, it's like a lot of these roads, our minimum now is 3 inches on a collector. We typically do 4 on a material 6 or thicker. So we do have a hefty pavement structure too.
Is it weather that's causing just as much of a impact as?
A lot of times yeah, weather, thermal cracking is a big thing where asphalt over time gets brittle. It ages, it starts cracking between aggregate, and when it heats up, it stretches, When it cools down, it contracts, and sometimes it just splits based on that. And obviously, where you see your loading patterns, when a car drives over the road, it actually flexes. Asphalt doesn't resist internal forces like a concrete road. A concrete road won't flex, an asphalt road will. So asphalt roads, you have to be really conscientious about your base. So you want to transfer that load through your base to the subgrade below. So that's why we put down a base course underneath our roads. We're twofold. It stores water and drains water well, and it also transfers load. So that's why you see your cracks in the wheel path as well, where that road is actually slightly flexing, and over time it gets more brittle and it will crack there. And that's the most likely path for a crack, is that wheel path. So
Interesting. Excellent.
final thoughts. Like I said before, our streets continue to be in great condition. 84 is phenomenal. Look across the board. I think our roads are in very excellent shape, and that's due to funding pipelines, having people around in positions who care about maintenance, care about their work. Try to do a good job doing these maintenance techniques on time, rehabbing these roads, and obviously buoyed a little bit by having a lot of new development. But I mean, as long as we keep up with what we're doing, maintain these roads, be good suitors of tax dollars, I think we're in good shape for now. Unfortunately, there's a large amount of residential streets near their first preventative maintenance cycle. As I said before, a lot of our roads were built in '90s, 2000s, and we haven't really done anything to them. So now's the time where we have to bring them back up to those 90+ ratings. Otherwise, they will continue to drop. And as a road gets in worse shape, it tends to drop faster, where once that crack happens, it propagates and water gets in, it softens the base, the crack turns into an alligator crack, which brings down your PCI even more. So we have to be responsible and try to crack seal these cracks as soon as they come up, so.
So let's say we have, you've outlined 4 different budget scenarios, biggest to smallest, sort of the Goldilocks approach. In scenario 2, where we just stay within the constraints of what the TBD brings in, which puts us at like an 82 over time. So you've got more roads that need rehabilitation than you have money. How do you select the roads that you repave? Like, what is the value rating for each road that helps you make that decision when you can't do all the things that you want to do?
It depends. We'll look at like use case of the road. Generally, arterials and collectors take priority over residential streets, where it's like those are the most commonly traveled roads. Those are the roads that see the most cars. You want to keep them in good shape, keep people safe, keep people happy. And then going to residential streets, just look at the entire neighborhood as a whole, where if we can package together more work, it's we get a better price. Where it's like if there's unfortunately a neighborhood where it's just one cul-de-sac and it's a one of, and we decide to make that a project, we'll be paying a premium to it or for it. But what we can do is lump that in with something else nearby is kind of how we'd approach that.
Buy in bulk.
Yeah,
So to
and
speak,
then
you get a better
you get
price.
more of that bulk price. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's no good way to answer that, but probably look at the roads that would tend to need it more. And if they're splitting hairs, then just pick one.
I was curious if there was any weight given to things like in front of a school, for instance, or
I mean,
in front of a
I'd put that in
residential
front of like an
versus-
emergency vehicle,
Yeah,
like a.
like there's a bus
digital
barn,
wire
is where the
fire-
ambulances come out.
I have a comment about this, but let you go
Yeah,
first.
excuse me, you guys do a great job, because we hear from the public regularly. I mean, I know in my recent campaign, you hear from the public a lot about how good the streets are in Lacey, you really do. And they compare it to our neighboring jurisdictions a lot. And you hear a lot of comment about when they can tell when they leave Lacey. So that's a compliment to the work you guys do. So thank you. And then just a quick question. So the couple of small on the map that you, the PCI map.
Yep.
There's a couple that are red that are obviously not in good shape.
Yeah,
Are those the ones that are gonna be done next? I mean, are we, that we're gonna be getting to sometime soon, I would expect, since we're in.
We're gonna do some grant writing on.
it depends on the use case of the road and if we have the money for it, because when it gets to that poor state, obviously you need to rebuild it. generally more expensive. You see a lot of the roads that are red are very small sections.
Yeah.
So you're not really getting that bulk pricing on these. It's not like a whole neighborhood that's gone bad. It's not an entire stretch of Martin or an entire stretch of
Yeah.
Pacific that's gone bad. So
They're not necessarily on top of it just because they're on the.
yeah, pavement management, the worst first approach is not generally the approach that you take. Where it's like you try to keep good roads in good shape, but obviously when they get to a certain state, say the cul-de-sac you live on has potholes and, you know, you've busted 2 tie rods on your car in the last year, it's like, I'd hope we'd come and fix that or try to come and fix that for you, but we try not to let them get to that level of disrepair, but unfortunately it happens, they get ignored, they're just not traveled very much. It was like Nelson it was generally just a cut through where people sprinted through to go buy shelter and get to 37th or get to their home, and it's like, well, you know, technically this is in bad shape. It's red on the map. Let's go in there and do it. And keep it safe if people are gonna speed on it. I mean, I guess we gave them an Autobahn to drive on, but I'd rather have it be a safer Autobahn than one that's riddled with potholes and they fly into the fences or into somebody's home and damage their property that way, so.
Right, okay,
So
thank you.
maybe we'll get to them, but
I get it.
yeah.
So, can you remind me again of when we passed the Transportation Benefit District?
2017.
2017, Valentine's Day, 2017.
Citizen showed us a lot.
Yes.
Special election.
We went out
Yes,
and worked that.
we worked that hard in 2016 up to 2017, so I was trying to remember. when
Remember,
that
we had,
actual
Andy and I
passed.
did the roadshow.
Yes, we did. And
when I
that
got on council, we'd stop
Yeah.
funding the overlay project.
for 1 year, yeah. But anyway, the reason why I bring this up is because, for this council, remember, we passed this as basically a junior taxing authority, right? We went out and had the public vote on it to raise sales tax 0.2%.
Yep.
That sunsets in 10 years, and that is coming up here, sort of around the corner. And so I bring this up because I want the council to, number one, start thinking about that. But to Robin's question, what I would like to see is this council be a little bit more involved in understanding the decision-making process of where we're using Transportation Benefit District dollars and where we're not, and why we're making those decisions. So as we make a decision about the next Transportation Benefit District, do we go out, do we not go out? How we pass that councilmatically? Do we go back out for a vote? There's a bunch of things to think about. I just want to make sure this council and that future council understands the TBD really well, the decisions that go into it. And so we can explain it very well and explain how important it is. And I think that may require us to be a little bit more involved in some of how we get there, working with you a little bit more on how we get there.
And just to add on to that a little bit is, you know, how with the relationship to state streets, how that creates a great informational document to make those decisions and how we do our street overlay program, identify those projects. And then coming this late spring, you know, typically every year we do an annual report of the Transportation Benefit District, and we'll do a little bit more of a expanded history and background and structure of that. So since we have quite a few new council members since it was enacted, it'd be a good time to have that refresher and look at going forward.
I think a good model would be, what if that never passed back in 2017 and in 2014 when we're looking at not funding the overlay, what would those numbers be today? And better yet, what would they be in 2027? If we
Well,
didn't have.
I think there's a lot of information out there. I just think there is a decision point that this council is gonna have to make about what we do about the TBD. And I think it's not that far off. And I do think it's time for us to be able to better explain how we make the decisions on how we spend these TBD dollars. You know, it's all good science. We haven't really been involved in that decision-making process.
And if we ask the voters to support us again and continue to
Yes.
give us this funding, whether we do it at the doors or we do it as part of a councilmanic action, being able to describe why.
Why?
What are we using this
Yeah.
for? Why do we need this money?
And that's why it's important that I think we understand this a little bit better, which we haven't had to do up to this point, but I think it makes sense that we start doing a little bit more going forward as we hit that 10-year. Okay,
That is roughly, the program is paid for through the transportation benefit district versus federal grants and that sort of thing.
So, let me take a quick look here. So the arterial street, I mean, we requested $5.3 million this year for transportation benefit district. But the arterial street fund budget this year is 26 million. Not that we'll have 26 million, in projects. But I would say just roughly 20% maybe. And then just to keep in mind, and we'll get into this more detail with future presentations. This is strictly focused on rehabilitation. The grants we go for most of the time are for capital improvements. Every now and then a rehab grant comes available, and we did, college and highway, the super T with that, but those grants are pretty rare. So this has always been strictly focused on rehab.
yeah, maintenance preservation.
And the council, prior to moving in to form a transportation benefit district, and that's the thing I've always loved about this council, it's always been very supportive of infrastructure and keeping it in, in excellent condition. But the city used to, out of the general fund $1 million to $2 million a year in an overlay program. But then when the budget started getting tighter and it became evident that that was not sustainable, then the council supported forming the transportation benefit district and then going to the voters for a sales tax increase to fund the transportation benefit district.
I think it passed in there, if I remember right, like 64 or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it passed overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
It wasn't razor thin margin.
No,
Majority.
It crushed it. Yeah.
Strong.
we did very well on that. Okay, does anyone have any questions? Okay, well,
If you
thank
have
you.
any,
Thank you.
my contact information is here.
Good job.
Just give me a call, shoot me an email. I'll try to respond. If you want to sit down and talk about the roads, let me know. I can always accommodate.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Scott.
So next up on our agenda is the proposed amendments to the countywide planning policies. And I know we've asked the deputy mayor to look into this a little bit more because he sits on our
UGA.
UGA. And I know Grant has been involved in this as well, and I think he's gonna be with us.
So Grant's gonna be with us. I'm just gonna preface this so that Grant can take the deeper dive into it. So we were at the December 20th UGA subcommittee meeting, and this is something that's up to be added to the countywide planning plan. However, before it can be added, it has to be approved by this body, and all the other bodies get a chance to take a look at it before any additions can be made. The tribal coordination, HB, House Bill 1717, basically just says, hey, you guys, everybody needs to do what Lacey already did in 2012, which was to bring the tribe to the table in their decision making. And then there's also a Senate Bill 5593, which deals with the UGA and, UGA land swaps is what it really is. So if you're going to swap land from inside to outside the UGA, there's some rules and regulations. Grant was part of I believe some of the writing of this, or at least the way it was put together. And so he's going to take a deeper dive into, how that's going to look and what it is that we need to sign off on before this is added to the countywide planning plan.
Did you say 5523?
5593.
This is really good timing. Obviously, we're doing this work, and it's I think it's a really important because for a long time, we've looked at our UGA, and there's been the southern eastern part of UGA is in a critical areas, which doesn't make any sense to put growth there. And so I've been advocating for a long time that we need to get that out of our UGA. If it's critical areas, we shouldn't be putting growth into a critical areas. And so what that would require us to do is move it from that area and move it to an area that makes more sense. And that'd most likely be in our northwest part of our city in our urban growth area. But we have to do all of this work in order to make that next step, which I think it will be an important step for the growth of our city and the growth of our community.
And then one of the things that the state wants to make sure of is that you don't end up with more UGA after you do a swap.
Yeah. But Grant, you want to take it from there?
Sure, although I don't know that I can add too much of critical content. The deputy mayor's been sitting through these and the meetings and has been briefed a number of times by TRPC staff. I will give a little bit background on the countywide planning policies, which are required by the Growth Management Act as kind of the overarching policies that every jurisdiction has to plan to within that county in their comprehensive plans. So it's kind of the high level. This is the direction the entire region wants to go in. The Growth Management Act set those up as actually being adopted by the Board of County Commissioners within the counties, planning under GMA. In this region, we've had a very collaborative process for years, and actually baked into the countywide planning policies, not just a consultation with the cities and the towns when the county adopts them, but an actual formal process in which the cities participate. So there's a urban growth management subcommittee of TRPC that makes a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners on any changes to the countywide planning policies. So it's not just in many jurisdictions, it's the county just deciding what to have as the overarching policies. In Thurston County, it's very collaborative with the cities and towns. Towards that end, there's the deputy mayor did go over the two changes that we're looking at that are mandated by state law. The first, as was stated, I think just really codifies Lacey's commitment to collaborative planning with the tribes that we've seen over the years. So I think it's good for other areas, but I think we've been already doing this, and so it's kind of a no-brainer and something that probably should have happened statewide long ago. So the part of the process too of reviewing countywide planning policy updates, the planning directors within the region serve as a technical advisory committee to the urban growth management subcommittee. So this is something that the planning directors wholeheartedly endorse through that process. And the second amendment also, based on amended state law, as the deputy mayor indicated, makes it easier to do urban growth boundary changes in the situation where you're actually swapping land for taking some away one place and adding it someplace else. And all the planning directors identified areas within our jurisdictions that this could be useful. And to the mayor's point, when we did the Coolio Park addition, it may have been easier had we been able to do the land swap methodology with some of those sensitive areas in the south. It would have gone through a different process that isn't as onerous. And as the deputy mayor indicated, the caveat is you can't increase the overall size of your urban growth area through that process. So it's really just another tool in our toolbox to manage our urban growth area appropriately. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
What's the next step in this process? Obviously, this urban UGA subcommittee is something that just came back together. We hadn't seen it.
Yeah, it's an ad hoc committee that gets together when needed.
But now back together. When's the final report out and due, and maybe when are we going to see some decision making happening on some of these land swaps?
So part of that process that's built into the countywide planning policies is for the jurisdictional representatives on the Urban Growth Management Committee to come back and consult with their councils or Board of Commissioners and get their feedback for the final decision, final recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. So should the council support the deputy mayor's position on the Urban Growth Management Subcommittee, we're talking about getting back together in January or early February to take the official vote at that level. Then it would be forwarded to a public hearing at the Board of County Commissioners. So first quarter of 2024, I would say.
Just add on, a reason why this briefing is occurring is again, baked into the countywide planning policies for amendment to the policies, specifically says to come back and consult with the home councils, if you will, on issues. And this is also reinforced with kind of, as you know, we're gonna be talking about intergovernmental committees later on. It's also reinforced in the City of Lacey Council's policies and procedures that you'd serve on these boards. These issues come back and make sure that you're representing the consent of the council as well. So that's the reason why we're coming through and bringing this forward, and the deputy mayor's asking, bringing this topic up and see if there's any issues or concerns.
And so I can tell you guys right now, one of the sticking points, the only sticking point that I foresee in this is that not all parcels are the same size, right? So let's say, for example, you have 30 acres over here in the south that you want to swap out for 30 acres over here. Well, what if the math doesn't math out?
Yeah.
And you end up with 31 over here that needs to be swapped out for 30. You know, and the thing is that you can't end up with more than you had before.
Mhm.
So that is the final sticking point that I think that a hurdle that we're gonna have to get over. And I was talking about the grant evaluation already. You know, how do we clear that?
Yeah.
So isn't that, that's state law though, right? The part that you can't grow the urban growth area at all in that land swap.
Through that process, that's correct. But there are other ways to increase the size of the urban growth area. This just takes away a lot of the paperwork and the review process for swaps.
So this
So
is a shorter, more streamlined process for making adjustments when there's kind of pressure to make a shift.
Yeah.
So
Correct.
you know, if you've got a spot, the 30 acres, you can't build there because they're pocket gophers or something, or some sort of commercial development has shifted. You could still swap for 29 acres.
Yeah.
Or, you know, of buildable land, like somewhere where it makes more sense.
Through the longer process.
You just can't. Well,
You can
for-
swap to
for
swap.
Less.
Yeah, swap for less, right?
Oh, yeah, you can end up with less. Yeah, you're right.
So,
It's not more.
is it Lacey's strategy to try to get as much land out of that critical areas down south and swap it to somewhat close to the parcels up north?
Yeah, that was actually a point of great debate during the joint plan process. You know, so our existing comprehensive plan does indicate that we should be looking at taking those areas out of the urban growth area. And I think the initial thought was that sewering those areas would be an environmental protection method, which it is, but it's a very expensive one. And so probably a better way to protect those areas is to have them in the county at a very low density designation. And then that would allow us to, as you indicate, potentially move some of that urban growth area to a more developable spot.
I mean, when are we gonna have that discussion on where that could possibly go? Cause that's a big deal of where that UGA could go. I mean, it changes, obviously, that existing county not gonna be developed into your UGA. Now that's gonna be planned for future growth. I mean, that's a big deal.
It is, and that's will be part of the upcoming 2-year process in updating our comprehensive plan. That'll be all of the important discussions that need to take place through that process.
Okay. So just real quick on the land swap, one of the conditions is that less than 15% of the areas added to the urban growth area are critical areas.
Yeah.
And then the total surface area, and then it also outlines that that these are not to be designated as agricultural forest or a mineral resource. And then there's a transportation element and a capital facility plan element in there as well.
Yeah. Okay. well, it sounds like you're headed in the right direction and over the next couple of years, you're gonna figure this out. And I'm sure there'll be check back ins with the council and we'll see how it goes. But that it's a big deal. We as we know, we need to plan for future growth and Lacey's UGA is where most of that growth is gonna be coming. And if you take out that critical areas where you can't really put growth there anyway, it's gonna start changing, right?
The shape of.
It's gonna start changing everything. And so that's gonna be, all of a sudden that land becomes a lot more valuable in areas that can be future UGA because growth can happen there.
Yeah.
And so that's gonna be some interesting conversations that we have with the landowners as well, you know?
Be a part of the UGA.
Okay.
Never gonna be developed.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay. Next up is our neighborhood commercial update.
Now I'm tracking.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm gonna see if I can get the slides going on here.
You need to
I'm gonna do it on this one.
share it up on there or?
Yeah, I was gonna send it up over there. I know.
Exciting. Are they already on?
There we go. I'm Hans Shepherd, for those that don't know. I've been working on the neighborhood commercial districts, which is kind of turning into something of a repeal and replacement of our code as it's currently written. This project started off a little over a year ago at this point, really kind of centraling around a lot of the attention that the Meridian Market campus got. And then from there, it kind of grew into more of a full-scale review of really what our districts are today and how are they performing. And from a community perspective, are they really meeting the community's expectations? And then if not, where can they go or how can they be updated or adapted to really kind of better meet the expectations of the community? So with that, I did just want to throw a map up here. I don't know that I can move our little screen, but just so everybody can get oriented, there are 8 different neighborhood commercial districts within our city. And they're located generally on the periphery of the city. And one of their primary goals is to fill a lot of the gaps of our other forms of commercial districts. So they really are kind of smaller in character and scale and really kind of provide those more neighborhood level, kind of shorter trips, those last minute goods, that kind of thing that don't really require a full trip into kind of the downtown kind of central core area to more commercial zone. Yeah.
In the urban growth area on this map, do we have neighborhood commercial zones like pre-identified?
Yeah, so those ones that are kind of highlighted in that reddish color in the urban growth area are also urban or neighborhood commercial districts. So as we incorporate more of the urban growth area, we will be adding to the list that we currently have.
And are we looking at them now especially right now, since we're doing all this collaboration with the county and trying to get them to come up to speed for us, are we giving them any input on these districts during this process?
Yeah, so anytime any development comes through the urban growth area or any permits come into the urban growth area, the county does consult the city as part of that process and asks for our kind of thoughts on that development. And we do provide feedback and guidance based on kind of where our goals are in the long term and where we're headed.
And also too, we just finished the joint planning process for the current comp plan. As we go through this next cycle of 2 years for updating for the 2025, we'll also be working with the county to update those standards reflecting this work as well.
So that's the map there. And then the rest of my presentation is kind of broken into 3 different sections. One is a recap of everything that we've done to date, just kind of getting to the point that we're at today. And then the second 2 sections are a review of our code kind of as it's written, but then also some recommendations on how it can be adapted both from a design perspective and also a uses perspective. Yeah, so do I have a mouse on this one too? I'll move that out of the way. There we go. So yeah, late in 2022, early 2023, we did kind of a formal project kickoff of this update process. It was we went into it without a whole lot of specific questions in mind, really broad based. We wanted to get as much feedback early on as possible from the community. Really let that feedback guide this process and really kind of control where it went. So as part of that initial kind of community outreach, we held a hybrid kind of open house. We also had an online presence as part of that. We also did a survey. We publicized this through different social media platforms, newspaper publications. We reached out to all the different HOAs. We have a couple different distribution lists of folks that have previously expressed interest in these topics. So anytime that this kind of a discussion comes up, they're notified about it as part of that. We also stood up a project-specific page within our city website. So it's kind of serves as a library for all the content that we've created. Everything that we've learned, all of our findings get posted there as well as distributed. So it's kind of a place that folks can keep coming back to as we work through this process and as we learn and add more content to that. So that's always a great location. And then we also reached out to the youth council, presented to them, got feedback from all of those different avenues. In total, we had around 150 different in-person direct conversations with folks, either at open houses or more kind of organically as people expressed interest in the subject. Online, we had around 875 survey participants and other people kind of writing in, sending emails, communicating in some form or another about this topic kind of throughout the entirety of it.
Did we combine those two numbers and divide it by the number of residents we have in the city, where are we at?
It's not a very big number.
2%?
It's a low number.
It's not a very big number, but still a lot of outreach and a lot of input that comes in that's historically we don't generally get.
Yeah, compared to other outreach efforts that we've done previously, that is a higher percentage of participation than we normally see. So it did feel like a success in that sense that we were getting broad reach as far as getting the word out and raising awareness. And then what's not reflected in that is the reach of the outreach that we did. So how many times folks at least clicked into the website, how many times did they open different reports, did they read about things?
Did we at least get a representative sample from?
Yeah, so some of the survey questions that we did ask geographic based and kind of demographic based questions as part of the survey. So a key reason for that is to make sure that we're getting a representative feedback anytime that we ask these questions. Is this really representative of the community as a whole, or are certain sections of our community being more outspoken than others? And then kind of weighting the feedback that we do receive accordingly based on where that feedback is coming from. So if we're not hearing from a certain segment of the population, factoring that into our thought process as we're looking at the responses that we do get. That graphic here is actually kind of one of the breakdowns. So we did have an initial summary report that ran through all of that and broke it out. So respondent information and demographics, that's actually just a screenshot of one of the pages from that initial findings report that kind of looks at who's responding, who's providing feedback, where are we kind of being successful at reaching the community, where are those gaps at. So we did all of that analysis and that's available on our project page as part of this. Some of the initial early findings that we did here, the intent of these districts, generally speaking, is popular. That said, we're not really accomplishing that intent currently today within our districts as they currently are. So while the idea of them was well received, we're not seeing that in practice. So there's a pretty big divergence between what our expectations are and what's being constructed on the ground. Other common themes that we heard about was vehicle and shipping traffic concerns. So when these commercial locations are having their shipments coming in, there's trucks, that modal conflict between people that are maybe neighborhood walkers, bikers, people that are traveling on these streets as well, and kind of that conflict and how those different modes of transportation interface with each other. So that was a common theme. Specifically north of I-5, we heard a good amount of feedback about quality food and produce options. That isn't necessarily specific to neighbor commercial districts. That is more of a general comment. But just generally speaking, there is a lack of kind of grocery store style options north of I-5 that a lot of the comments addressed as part of this. Yeah. So this is, yeah, so this is just a summary of what we are.
Bus routes.
Yeah. And then other common themes that we heard about, things like square footage and setbacks are not really adaptive enough to each one of these locations or the types of uses that take place. They are pretty kind of broad brush strokes, if you will. They don't really allow for a whole lot of creativity or flexibility in individual site design. So that was something that we heard. And then the last one was the relationship of residential, both on these locations, which is currently allowed above ground floor commercial, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But then just there, and then immediately surrounding these locations. So that relationship of residential to commercial uses and how they really kind of work together. Those were some of the common themes that we heard as part of that.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
why isn't our vision meeting the reality? Why isn't the reality meeting our vision?
So, yeah, we looked into that and we'll get into it a bit more as we move along here. But some of our takeaways is that traditionally our code has been a lot more kind of use-based in its application. So instead of focusing on the design components of it, it's more listing like movie rentals was actually one that's still currently in there, which we'll get into. But yeah, so there's two different kind of groups of thought on how to do land use kind of zoning. One is more use oriented, whereas you list every single type of use and say it's either permitted or not permitted. Or you take more of a design kind of exterior characteristics approach, and you talk about kind of setbacks, and you talk about
More of a
street
form-based
frontage, and so
code.
form-based code. And we'll get into this in a little bit, but we looked at a bunch of example districts as part of this, and what we're seeing is that there's definitely a shift more towards form-based approaches, which allows us to have a little bit more control and say over how the kind of feel of these districts is built out, which is really where you have more control over kind of the, I don't know, vibe, in lack of a
Form-based
better
is
word.
also more predictable for the developer or
Mhm.
people looking at.
Yeah, so there's more consistency.
Areas because they're not built.
Yeah.
The last time we did form base in the, in Midtown,
Midtown.
that area, it was there was already existing, stuff there. So
Mhm.
form base is more difficult to implement because it
It's all-
takes a lot longer, right?
Mhm.
Because only as things change. These aren't built yet.
Right.
And it seems like that'd be a really good opportunity for form base.
There is, but I just want to caveat a little bit, because this wouldn't be a true form-based type of code application, but it's taking elements and principles of form-based to look at the site design, and it has an advantage, as you mentioned, that some of these spot areas are undeveloped, whereas if you need developed area, you're thinking a hybrid approach, because you gotta deal with the existing environment
Right.
and somewhat match and start converting, so. But yeah, it's not true form-based, but it's taking those principles, I think is what they're doing, and trying to look at the site design, and how it lays out and creates that neighborhood feel.
Yeah, so, and we'll get into a good amount of this in a little bit, but the kind of one of the takeaways that we had is that, yeah, shifting away from the uses as being the primary kind of controller of what goes on in these districts, and using more of a designed approach. Not to say that we're not getting rid of either one entirely, but just shifting that emphasis from uses to more of a design seems to give us more of an opportunity to kind of change the character of these districts to better meet that intent statement that we've identified. And that the community has kind of verbalized that they are in alignment with and do, in kind of a theoretical sense, are a fan of. We just really haven't seen that in an application sense yet. So also part of our outreach, we did door-to-door business and tenant outreach. So we went
But
to,
just so I
Yeah,
fully
for sure.
understand, so people are saying they're more in favor of what is gonna be there as opposed to how it's gonna look? Is that what you just said? Cause I don't wanna just speed past that and ask about it later.
yeah, no,
The other way around.
Other way around.
The other way around. What it looks like is more important than what's there.
yeah, so it wasn't a resounding 100% this way or 100% that way, but generally speaking, the feedback that we did receive as part of this outreach did lean more towards the kind of exterior character and how these districts came together as a whole versus individual uses.
Fitting it in with the neighborhood.
Yeah.
and that.
Who's making that decision? Because obviously if you say, okay, there can be A here or there can't be A here, that's leaves a little gray area. So who then determines what that gray area looks like?
No.
Does that make sense?
Examiner.
So you're relying on, one person to.
So we do get into a lot of this later, so I might keep moving through this.
Okay, yeah,
and
let's
see if I
move.
answer those questions. And then if I don't, by all means, let's have this
Okay.
conversation.
Land use always brings the intense
Oh,
discussions.
very engaged.
I mean, it's, yeah, no, it's good. So yeah, also as part of this outreach, we reached out to all the businesses that are currently operating within these districts. And that included businesses, business owners, site managers, property owners, prospective developers. We went door to door, but then we also did additional outreaches, follow-up. Just one, to make them aware of this process that we're going through, also to seek their kind of feedback, what's working, what's not. How can we improve these districts to better support these businesses and grow businesses within these districts? Because I don't remember who said it, but quite a few of these districts are actually currently undeveloped. So trying to figure out why that is and creating a more environment that is consistent with what the community is looking for, but also positive for future development.
Victory too.
Yeah. So some of the high level, and given this early on, we did go back to both the community and businesses multiple times throughout this, but early on, one of them was just general surprise that they were even located in neighborhood commercial districts. So part of this was awareness of what neighborhood commercial districts are. And then also just getting in some FaceTime, connecting them with our different departments, different resources. I went out with Wesley, who's our economic development coordinator, just getting some FaceTime, kind of letting them know what resources are out there, having those initial conversations, and then doing some follow-up. And then other feedback that we received early on, and given there's more later, but kind of market-driven uses. So kind of giving away from, again, that yes, this is permitted, no, this is not permitted as far as uses, and more just kind of based on what that location can support, seemed to be a theme that was repeated throughout those conversations that we saw. And then also residential was another one that came up, primarily more from the developer side of things. So some of the empty sites that are currently owned by developers, residential is currently permitted, as our code is written, above ground floor commercial, so second floor and above. But there was some discussions and interest in exploring ways to incorporate, ground floor residential as well, within these districts. So that was another, topic that came up as part of those conversations.
2 or 3 stories high out.
So the limit right now is 35 feet, which translates at best to a 2-story building. Typically in practice, we don't have all of the development that we have within our neighborhood commercial districts is currently single story. So that's another thing that we talk about later, that we do look at.
Start triggering elevators and sprinklers and
So you can do up to a 4-story building now without requiring an elevator.
certain amount of square footage, right?
Right, so
Was
there
it
are-
7,000?
Yeah, so historically it was, the restrictions have changed a bit. So there is more interest in things up to a 4-story building now, when even previously, or historically, I should say, when you allowed up to a 4-story building, but that was the max, a lot of folks just aren't interested in it because the amount of additional costs associated with going that one extra floor related to specifically elevators just didn't really make it pencil.
Yeah.
But now there is increasing interest in that kind of mid 4-story range that really historically there wasn't as much. So even if you allowed it, people just weren't gonna build up to that height because it just, the extra amount of space didn't translate well. One of the other questions that we asked throughout our conversations with everybody that we were speaking with, both community and developers and everybody in between, was, are there example locations that we can model these districts after? The reason we asked this question is that a lot of times this is kind of a hypothetical conversation that we're having about the future. And it's a lot easier for folks to identify this neighborhood or this district is a good example of kind of the idea of what I want these locations to be in the future. So it's easier to have those conversations than do you want a 5 or 10 foot setback. So we actually got over, I think, 100 different locations that through our conversations were identified. We come through those kind of for the top or kind of reoccurring examples that folks kept pointing to. And then also we looked at those from a, how well do they match up with the city of Lacey? So from a population perspective, from kind of a commercial development perspective, we looked at a bunch of different metrics. And some of the top examples included some of the University Place, DuPont, the Proctor District, Point Ruston, Wildwood and Briggs in Olympia, Port Townsend and Fairhaven were all kind of near the top of the list of example districts that kept being identified as what folks would like to see these districts kind of modeled after as good examples of what these districts could be. And then from there, we went a little bit deeper and looked at, nice thing is that they're all cities, they all have codes, they all have codes specific to these districts that were identified. So we went deeper and looked at their various different design elements, their different intent statements, permitted uses, access and public spaces, relationships to housing, all these different metrics, and kind of compared them with our districts and tried to find common elements, common themes, things that really are consistently repeated throughout these districts that might make sense within our districts as well. So, and there will be more on that later. And then draft code updates and community reviews. So kind of moving forward into fall of 2023. We shared all of these findings with the community, both again in a hybrid format, also to our website, to the project page. We did internal department reviews. So as we're kind of focusing in on what this code could start to look like, we circulated that within our departments to make sure not only did it work from a planning perspective, but a development perspective from streets, from utilities, from kind of everybody all across the board, to make sure that we don't get a great idea, but for some reason it just doesn't work from a different perspective. So we want to make sure that what we're kind of moving forward was consistent and actually could work in practice. And then we did cycled it through the planning commission a couple times, did briefings and work sessions there. And also the last and final land use environmental committee, we were able to meet up with and do a presentation as part of that as well, and share some of our findings at that. And now this last one is really kind of moving into where we are today. So January 9th is this council meeting that we're having right now. And we are looking for guidance at this point on the next two sections that we'll dive into. But moving forward, we're actually meeting again with Planning Commission tomorrow, where we'll be presenting a draft code and any feedback that we received tonight. And then from there, we're moving into community review. So at the same time, we're going to be releasing that draft code out to the community at large. We have a pretty robust interested kind of email list of folks that have been part of this process. So we'll be sending that back out to everybody who's kind of participated to this date and making it available on the website. And then
That would go out to everyone who did the survey.
everybody that provided an email address, I should say. Some elected not to. So anybody that's expressed specific interest in this process and also provided a way to contact them, we'll be sending it out to them directly, but then also doing publications and posts to raise just general awareness for anybody else who might be out there that wants to follow along as part of this. And then we have a public hearing scheduled for February 14th, just as kind of after that month of public kind of opportunity to review and digest and provide feedback on the public hearing in February. And then from there, we'll have planning commission recommendation moving into kind of the tail end of winter/spring 2024. And then that's where it'll come back to you guys for additional review and potentially action. It's kind of a high level timeline of where we're at and where we're going. Any questions on that?
Have any applications come in since we started this process
Any?
on any of the 8 parcels?
Nope.
Okay, second question, if there is an application in and that project fails for whatever reason, they're unable to proceed and they become no longer vested, does that parcel fall back into this pool of parcels?
Yes, I believe I followed that, and I believe the answer is yes.
If the application is currently approved, but they haven't moved forward and exercise their vesting with breaking ground within 18 months plus a 6-month extension, they would lose that vesting.
Okay, and then that parcel would fall back into this pool of.
Yes.
Okay.
But as soon as it's,
Do they have 2 years?
they have roughly 18 months and they are allowed up to a 6-month extension. But the vesting occurs when they break ground and exercise their grading permit and start putting infrastructure in the ground. And that would, then they could take quite some time to build and they'll still be vested.
And to that end, we are in conversations with most of the owners of these sites that are undeveloped as part of this process. We did reach out to them just to make sure that they're aware of the process and then also to solicit any feedback or thoughts that they may have about kind of where we're going and what we're looking at and any thoughts about future kind of site uses. So
Did any of them express their intent with the site?
so we're in conversations with 2 of them kind of ongoing as part of this. There's the one out on 41st, so kind of North Lacey. We're in pretty frequent conversation with them. And then also the one that's part of the Tilden Apartments. There's a section of that. I think it's still Tilden. They may have changed their name. But it's right off the roundabout, just.
Is that the 31st in Hogum or 31st in Willamette?
Yes, yeah. So it's south of where Meridian Market is. By maybe a half mile or so.
Did any of them say where they were planning to develop or sell?
So those two are still interested in developing, they're not interested in selling at this point. One of them, so the 41st actually one was recently acquired in the middle of this process they were doing by folks that are strongly involved within the update. And with the intent of developing it. So they've been providing feedback as part of this and kind of expressing what they're looking for, and that's played a role. It's not been necessarily a deciding role or strongly featured, but it has been factored into kind of what our recommendations are moving forward. Yeah.
So where do you need direction?
Yeah, so the next two sections of this include a little bit diving more into the site design and then also the uses. First one being site coverage and building form. Before we get too far, I did really want to quickly touch on architectural compatibility and site design review. So outside of neighborhood commercial districts, we have a design review section of our code that applies to all of our zoning districts, not just neighborhood commercial districts. So that includes things like multifamily projects, condominiums, commercial design guidelines, public transportation, pedestrian circulation, zones with pedestrian emphasis, also things like stormwater, environmental performance standards, off-street parking and landscaping. And there are sections within that code that specifically speak to neighborhood commercial districts. So everything that we put into our neighborhood commercial district is in addition to kind of our higher overarching set of codes that really apply to all of our districts. So what we're going to be looking at tonight is kind of in addition to our set standards that we universally kind of apply across our districts. So it's important to factor these in because there are already quite a few kind of regulation and design guidances that are out there that dictate kind of the form to some degree. So this is just taking it a step further beyond what these are. And this is just a diagram to kind of give you a better example of what we're talking about there. So it has to do with things like minimum setbacks, number of windows, facade articulation, outdoor areas, ground floor windows, different elevations and step backs and things like that. So really kind of when you put them all together, you get a building. And depending on the district you're in, that building can look a little bit different. So currently within our code as it's written today, we have a max development coverage of 70%. And what that is it's kind of a makeup of your buildings, your access roads, your parking, kind of all the hard impervious surfaces. And comparatively, when we're looking at some of our other kind of districts that we have within our community, that's actually lower than both our moderate density and high density residential. So in practice, that translates to a relatively suburban style development. And what we heard both from the community and when looking at those example districts is that that's actually pretty low compared to a lot of those example districts that folks are looking for. So right now, as our code is written, it requires a relatively suburban style, kind of low density form of development. And our feedback was not that we want really high, but maybe something a little bit more in that middle range.
What's the recommendation?
Yeah, so at least 80 is kind of where that was, that kind of happy middle ground. And we'll go into that in a little bit more in a second here. And it's kind of the blue squares in this diagram that you have here. So the 75 gives you kind of a close approximation, but a little bit more than, sorry, it's the black squares here I'm talking about. And then the other one that's in this site coverage section is max building coverage. And right now that's at 50%. So 50% of any site is typically allowed to be building as part of the way our code is written. And the feedback that we got on that is that is okay, but typically whatever's not building is parking lots. And parking lots are not terribly popular, and it really does kind of impact the character of a site when you have a lot of parking. And these are supposed to be a little bit more kind of human centric, a little bit kind of smaller in scale.
People can walk there and get the services. You know,
So while the recommendation right now is to probably keep it at 50%, create avenues that allow for a larger building, less parking. So that has to do with kind of where parking is used, maybe something below grade, maybe some on-street parking, some other bonuses like public spaces that incentivize larger development coverages. So that's kind of where we centered on that one so far. And that's also pulled from example districts they were looking at as part of this. So those are the two recommendations for.
Great.
Potentially. So if you're looking at a 4-story building, and maybe you want to put some of that potential associated parking below grade, then there's potential building coverages, bonuses that you could get out of that. So you maybe can build a bigger building, create more public kind of open spaces on the ground floor, kind of draw people in, make that interface between the sidewalk and site uses a little bit more interesting, a little bit more engaging, and move that parking away from that kind of zone, if you will, to kind of create more of a space that people want to spend time in instead of just kind of driving to and then leaving.
We haven't seen a whole lot of below grade show up.
Correct.
Because it's super
For a fixed lane.
Really expensive.
Yeah, so there's definitely a big price tag attached to it, but it's kind of looking towards the future and creating opportunities and incentives.
We go to like Leavenworth, you have like the cheese business down below and a bunch of other wineries.
So why are we still recommending 50% of the buildings? I'm just not, so if we're talking about going to 80% on impervious surface.
Mhm.
Why do we really care if it's the impervious surface is building or something else?
Mhm.
We don't want, I mean, because the rest is gonna be parking lots, right? So if we don't, we're not saying you can't do the parking lot, but why wouldn't we allow bigger buildings instead of more parking lot?
Mhm. So we do get into that a little bit. So these are baselines and they are kind of recommendations of the direction that we think that we're going. If what that final number is, we haven't necessarily settled on yet. So definitely looking for feedback. Are we moving in the right direction? And then also if we want to get into the granular kind of what number makes sense, we can. I don't know if we have enough time for that tonight, but any feedback that you have to offer, I appreciated. I will be good.
I think, as Lenny's probably pointing out, I think it should be somewhat more market driven. If the market's saying, we can't make this work under the current codes, maybe that's why we're not seeing this development happen, then we should, probably, definitely add the 10%. And then I agree. You'd think if it's gonna be 80%, max coverage, the building should be up to about 75. It should be just allowed from the get-go,
Or at
right?
least 60, you're adding 10.
Right, yeah.
Something minimum.
So like, it should definitely be an increase.
I'd rather see more building and less parking personally. I mean, and again, the developer's gonna decide that, right?
Yeah.
They're gonna decide what's gonna work, but I think we give them more flexibility. I mean,
And so will the tenants.
But
Uh,
isn't
at
this
least
current
what's-
state? This isn't the recommendation, this is just current.
Yeah, so right now it's at 50.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily the recommendation. The recommendation is to create incentives for that to increase. So, and those incentives might be things like encouraging off-site or below-grade parking, more open space, things like that. So instead of using that space for parking lots, that they're maybe using it as plazas or something like that. And through doing those types of developments on site, then they get building kind of
Credit.
coverage bonuses. So that it's not just that we're necessarily, so it's creating an incentive pattern to create types of uses and the types of environments that also the community is generally asking for as far as what that fit and feel looks like. And this is a way to accomplish that.
Have we ever been petitioned for more building coverage?
One more time?
Have we ever been petitioned for more building coverage?
This model is actually consistent with what is currently in the mixed use high density corridor, which is the Martin Way corridor zoning classification. There's a lot of incentive base that you can increase your development coverage and building coverage based off of adding pedestrian corridor through blocks, those type of things. So it's something that's currently is a model which in
So
the
if you
heating code.
wanna go over, then, hey, give us bike lane and some better frontage or something like that, and you can go over 50?
So that's kind of the general thought process of,
That's not what it is currently, but that's what we're
Yeah.
saying.
Right.
That direction.
so that's kind of the thought process and thinking the direction that we're moving.
Mhm.
Based on the feedback that we received, and it's a great way to, we can't full on. The intent statement is kind of a high level, kind of generalized thing. But when you're trying to think about in practice, what elements kind of meet or kind of create that intent, this is a way that we can kind of tools that we can have to use to really kind of encourage developers to create more of those types of environments that really kind of meet that.
I'd say be on the track.
So,
right
so my question still isn't answered, so I'm gonna.
Yeah.
So, have we ever lost business over 50%?
Specific to these districts, not to my knowledge.
That's tough to tell, because right now the code says this one way,
Yeah,
and you don't know if to say, well, I can't make
Yeah,
that
well, I
work
think-
because
yeah.
based on the basic code, that's
But
it.
then they never
That's what I was
come in,
asking,
so you
people
don't
to
know.
petition for.
Yeah.
From
We could
a,
say we lost business on Yelm Highway with those smaller buildings until we allowed like drive-throughs, and then all the other buildings developed. So, because one building was allowed to have a drive-through.
And that was a situation where we responded to the issues and concerns and brought it through a process to look at, does that still make sense?
But you know, we lost business before that.
Well,
For
if you-
20 years. That
I think what this council is saying is we're looking for more flexibility. Let's go ahead and talk
Yeah.
about that going forward.
And
What else we got?
to follow up on that, like, there's a scenario where there's a property owner that's like, I want to do this with my property and already has a designated zoning. And then there's also the scenario where somebody calls into the city and is like, I'm looking to do this type of business, where can I do that? And those are two different conversations. And typically when we have the second conversation, I mean, that we're not losing business, but we definitely guide them towards locations where that type of use works. So we're not, it's a smaller sample size of the people that already own a property and then are finding out that they can't do something with it
Yeah,
versus ones that are calling in and doing kind of their due diligence ahead of time, finding out where they work and then that. So it's, yeah,
So we try to provide alternatives, for sure with deals here.
right, right. So, yeah, we get those conversations or calls in a lot. It's just part of the planning department, and we work with folks to really find a site that meets their criteria and is whatever they're looking to do is permitted, one of the allowed uses within that zone.
I'll just say if there's interest in that parcel or property and it hasn't been developed in 20 years, you're losing business. Trust me.
okay, where else are this?
Yeah, so these are just a couple examples. I cut out a lot of these, but I just want to give you one quick. So this is the farm. It's located on College Street in Mullen. It is an example of one of our neighborhood commercial districts. And in practice, so it's kind of different from what our code currently allows for. So our code allows up to 50% building coverage and I think 80% lot coverage. But right now what we're seeing is that 25% building coverage and 70% lot coverage. And as we were talking about, most of that is in the form of a parking lot.
Do you know who owns that lot C in the parcel C in that building?
Why you want it? Is it you?
Yeah, so that was one example of one of our developed neighborhood commercial districts. And then as part of that outreach, we asked about example districts that folks liked. This is Briggs Tap House. This was recently constructed. Given this is still below kind of the targets that we're looking at, but it's closer to and kind of gives you an idea of what that looks like and kind of a comparison development. So this is a multi-story building. It's closer to that 40% building coverage. Lot coverage is still pretty high, but there's also still some kind of outdoor seating, more kind of activity going on outdoors and around that building that kind of brings people to and from the street and kind of creates that more of that energy that folks are looking for when we're talking about these districts.
I think it's a good example of neighborhood commercial because it has a recreational facility right next to it, a cafe across the street, and it's wrapped around with high density residential housing. Like, they're
Yeah.
building a bunch of apartments that are like a donut with that in the middle.
And one of the things that we talk about is the need for how X number of residential units to support these types of commercial spaces, which is something we've been running into with some of the districts that haven't been developed yet, is that they're kind of waiting for that residential number of units to meet that kind of carrying capacity so that they can support these.
The reason we've heard over the years why there is not a grocery store north of the highway.
Just to clarify about Briggs, the Briggs project too, is that was established in the 1992-94 comp plan, and it was a master plan village center type concept. So that whole area was master plan
A long time
with
ago.
long time ago. And it's taken a long time to develop and return to the market. Sometimes the market set the vision and eventually you have the growth occur and the market develops and you start creating your design. So that's a little bit different than a place of neighborhood commercial designation on an area That's not tied to a larger master plan. However, Meridian Campus are all master plans, and that's where you got your residential and commercial pieces in place. So I just want to kind of put that clarification too. There's some dynamics with some of these land use designations.
Mhm. Yeah. So then moving into gross floor area, we have two different maximum standards within our code as it's currently written today. One is for a single use, which is 10,000 square feet, and one is for a combination of uses or mixed use, which is 40,000 square feet. So that's what we have today. What we heard as far as feedback goes is that folks are looking for more kind of granular with our code as it's written. That's not really responsive to a range of kind of different uses that aren't quite captured in those two categories. So there's actually, I think, 5 or 6 different subcategories that we heard a lot about that really aren't reflected within those two numbers. So one of which, looking at single uses, currently that's a 10,000 square foot. What we heard is that based on the types of uses that folks are looking for, with the caveat that grocery stores are different, but everything else really is significantly smaller than that 10,000 square feet size building.
Is that the bakery in Olympia on San Francisco?
Yep, so that's the San Francisco Street Bakery. There's the Starbucks out on Yelm Highway
Right across from Briggs.
There's this Mud Bay, which is a feed store and then also a grooming store. And then in the corner of each one of these, I gave some kind of ballpark-ish square footages of each one of these. By comparison, this preschool here is right around 10,000 square feet. I'm blanking on the name of that one.
The new one.
That's the new one. That's,
AMPM.
yep, yeah, exactly. So generally speaking, what we heard is that single uses that are standalone don't have anything else connected to them. Smaller actually makes a whole lot more sense than that 10,000 square feet. With the caveat of grocery stores and actually preschools, which do need a little bit more space, but most of the other types of uses, bakeries, cafes, restaurants, what have you, all fall pretty well within a smaller footprint than that 10,000 square foot.
So is that something you're thinking about we're gonna change in this?
Yeah, so I'm gonna have a summary slide that runs all these together, but single uses, that's what kind of what we're talking about.
Hey, Hans, before you move from that though.
Yep.
So that's the max.
Yeah,
It doesn't stop
So
anyone from
everything
doing the 5,000 square foot or
exactly.
any of those others that are on there, right?
Correct, but what we're seeing is that it encourages people building to the max, and that doesn't necessarily translate to kind of human scale oriented spaces that we're looking for. So one of the discussions that we're hearing is smaller footprints and maybe encouraging a little bit more height. Creates more of a kind of vibrant, active location while still creating that total gross floor area that we're of however many square feet, but it's still a smaller footprint, so it's a little bit more interactive, dynamic kind of spaces.
So is 10,000 max because we were trying to prevent something?
Trying to prevent Woodland District.
Originally-
40,000 square foot building with
originally-
one tenant.
Originally, 10,000 square feet was looked at as a size that's neighborhood compatible with
Yeah.
the surrounding neighborhood, single family homes or multifamily. So that was a carryover from the early 1990s zoning standards, which is now we're updating to look at more something that's more flexible.
People powder coating and doing manufacturing stuff or something.
Or you don't say have something that's really on a
Giant big
scale.
box store.
Yeah, so, and
Lowe's is neighborhood commercial, correct? Isn't that a
no,
neighborhood?
that's.
No,
community
that's
commercial.
that was, yeah, a master plan that evolved into a community
Okay.
commercial designation after the fact.
And this is just single uses. We have a couple more slides.
Let's see if we can get through your slides.
So-
Be here all day and night.
Grocery stores was a common theme throughout all of the outreach that we did. So much so that it makes sense to create a separate category for grocery stores. Looking at example grocery stores in these other example districts and other kind of ones that seem to align well with where we're hoping our districts are heading. We have the Metropolitan Market up in the Proctor district, up in the top corner there. We have Spuds out by the airport. And then Ralph's Thriftway, I threw on there, not to necessarily suggest that scale, but just to give you an idea of even what's considered maybe a medium-sized, slightly on the larger side grocery store, still doesn't even hit that 4,000 or 40,000 square feet mark that we're talking about for a multi-use, but it's also bigger than a single use. So if it truly is a standalone grocery store without any, like maybe even a Subway or post office or other uses that take place that would turn it into a multi-use, neither of those ranges really fit grocery store well, is kind of what we found there. So creating kind of a unique category for grocery stores seem to make sense, because we also really want to encourage them specifically north of I-5 based on the feedback and just it's what we
Push
heard.
for Trader Joe's.
That Trader Joe's showed up a lot in the feedback that we got. And so, and then looking at multi-commercial, so the other end of the spectrum, I threw great floors on here just because I wanted to throw a little bit of something to give you guys perspective. So great floors is actually right around 42,000 square feet. And that's the maximum that's currently allowed within our neighborhood commercial districts as it's currently written today. And what we've been hearing is that that doesn't seem to really match up with the identity of these places that we're shooting for.
The great floors.
That's a multi-tenant facility.
And that's even assuming that it's a multi-tenant, whereas Great Floors is a single tenant. But it is a good example of what that building actually looks like when you're kind of thinking about these numbers. What does that look like in practice? Great Floors is a good thing to kind of picture when you're thinking about 40,000 square feet. And that, based on our feedback and based on our characters, doesn't seem to align with these districts. So what we did here is smaller buildings, more people-oriented spaces is consistently what we're looking for. So we looked at, again, the farm is in the lower left there. We looked at the Vic's Wildwood, but then also that entire commercial district there. And then this other one is Briggs Tap House again, and looked at the total square footage of each one of those to kind of guide our direction. We also looked at the other example districts. Again, smaller seems to make sense. Each one of these is a multi-tenant, but each one of them is well below even 10,000 square feet. And that seems to be more consistent with the type of development that folks are looking for and asking for within these locations. We did also want to look quickly at multifamily. There is a discussion. So currently, as it's written, residential uses are only permitted above ground floor commercial. If we are to expand that to allowing ground floor residential, there's currently nothing in our code as it's written that would address that. So if that is something that we do want to pursue, we would have to create a category that specifically kind of creates some direction for those residential uses. Because right now they're
To
not.
add more, wouldn't we need to add more height if if anyone's ever gonna build retail first floor apartments above? Right now you're maxed at 2 stories,
Okay.
right?
So yeah, looking at residential, it was generally well received within the feedback that we got. It also has the added bonus of creating more residential units in close proximity to support these commercial uses. To stimulate the primary use of a commercial entity, whatever that might be. It also has the benefit of buffering adjacent residential uses. So if you're looking at a full-on neighborhood commercial district located around the periphery of that might be residential, and moving towards the center of more commercial development. So when we looked at these, yeah, still smaller than the 40,000, but larger potentially than that 10,000 square feet, especially if we're looking at maybe a multi-story building to accommodate that. That's gonna.
Might that, provide some lower income housing if we allow first floor.
It definitely has the potential to. I mean, that'll be partially, I mean, primarily dependent on what the developer's looking to do, but these districts may have the opportunity to offer that. We didn't get into that level of detail at this point, but that would be a great outcome of this.
But we could say, we could allow ground level residential if some of it had a low income component to it.
So there.
We could add that as a bonus.
Yeah, so, and I'll get into that in a little bit.
Well, let's get, that's,
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and then the last one was mixed use. So right now it's 40,000 square feet, mixed use, and that's a combination of commercial and residential. That amount of square footage did typically still seem a little bit large, looking at examples around the community and in the region. We have Serenity Apartments down here, down in the lower corner, the lower right, which is actually a live work. We have in the center here, that's off of 6th Street, and that's what used to be at Andy's Bistro down there at the bottom. Given that building is larger, but that front part that you drive by is right around 30,000 square feet when you include each one of those floors, as far as gross floor area, not just the ground floor footprint. looking kind of down towards Olympia, was the only example I found that was kind of mixed use, and that's Annie's Flats, which is recently built. I think there's a pet store right across the way. But that's right around that 40,000, and that I believe is a 5-story building, so not necessarily recommending that amount of height, but just again, as an example of what that looks like in scale. That's kind of the largest kind of end of that spectrum of what a 40,000 square foot building could look like. Yeah.
Does anybody know how the live work is working out? I mean,
I live in it.
okay.
How does it work?
I would say it's the second one I've actually lived in. So the first one was up north, and it was built to actual commercial standards for the actual work area. These are not. And so I would say if there's the stipulation that the work unit is built to commercial standards, these are more unfinished residential than they are work. So it is, I think, great. They're great units. They have the potential to be great. So I would really push for more of those, especially because I have a lot of members at my business who are hairdressers or just, you know, estheticians or different things. And it's a perfect scenario for someone to start their own business as a starter location, which can then lead to more.
Which makes
So,
sense in this residential.
yeah, I would highly say it's a great idea. It just needs to be done better than what was done.
Those are our first ones.
Yeah, that's right.
So this slide is really just a summary of everything we just ran through. So currently, as our code is written, it's either 10,000 for a single use or 40,000 for a multi-use. Based on the feedback and based on comparative districts, more of a granular approach that kind of breaks out different uses a little bit further seems to make sense. And based on kind of looking at the types of uses that do well in these districts, this is kind of the summary that we're looking at. So single commercial use closer to that 6,000 square foot range, with caveat of a grocery store being larger and preschools being larger. Multi-commercial, that's typically at best a 2-story building. Because beyond that, you don't see a whole lot of 3-story commercial structures that are purely commercial. So looking at, and then also starting to introduce footprints a little bit, so building coverage. So still smaller footprints, but still capturing that height vertically. So it creates a little bit more of a interactive dynamic space. So multi-commercial in practice, that would be around a 2-story building, and then multifamily, this could be potentially a 3-story building, but with the same square footprint as the multi-commercial. And then down at the bottom is the max, or mixed use, I should say, which is maintaining that 40,000, but that's with the assumption that it's a combination of commercial on the bottom and residential above. But to
40,000.
right, and to move away from kind of the great floor example, which again, we don't anticipate in these districts, but we are recommending a max footprint for each one of these individual buildings. So while they can accomplish that total square footage, it's accomplished vertically and not horizontally. So they're a little bit more compact, more going on in a smaller space.
So each one of these locations could potentially have all 4 of the uses?
Potentially, yeah. Yep. It's not dictating that it has
Which
to be
would
one
track-
or the other.
would
It's just creating more kind of design elements when you're
More
constructing.
businesses like SCG, SCJ Alliance, right, as compared to like a Big Four.
Yep, that was actually a building that I looked at, and that square footage is still below, I think 8,000,
Yeah,
or
it's like
the
10,000.
footprint, I should say, is right around that 8 or 10,000. Vertically, I think it's a 2-story building, so it has more total square footage, but the footprint is still relatively small compared to a lot of these examples.
When you say individual building coverage, you're talking about ground floor, basically. You're talking about how much.
Each individual building, so you could have multiple multifamily or multiple mixed use examples of this within one district.
You're saying you couldn't have a mixed use building of 40,000 square feet. You'd have to have 4 buildings at 10,000 feet.
No, I'm saying that you could have a 4-story building that is 10,000 square foot footprint.
Right, okay, that's what I'm saying. So that individual building coverage is really footprint.
Yeah,
It's not
so,
it's not building coverage,
Correct.
it's footprint.
yeah,
Okay.
so it's how much space
That's what I
they
was
take up
clarifying, okay.
within these districts, but you could couple a few of each one of these building examples within one district.
Sure,
So total, you could have a lot more than any one of these,
right.
but it creates more of an interactive space, a lot more pathways, corridors, kind of. Yeah, higher density, instead of kind of the horizontal construction, it's vertical construction.
So for the sake of the people, you can go ahead.
Does it make sense after what you found out, does it make sense to possibly expand the actual footprint of some of these neighborhood commercial districts? And can you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish with each example of this within any of our neighborhood commercial districts? Or is there enough actual space?
To
that-
make the districts.
Yeah,
bigger.
make the districts so bigger.
Quite a few of them are actually pretty large. They do range, I think from under an acre to over 6 acres. I'm going off my memory here, so don't
Okay.
quote me on that, but each one of them does have, I mean, these buildings are actually, their footprints are pretty small. So you could actually fit quite a few of them in each one of these districts. So they do work in like in practice, they could fit.
So let's say 41st Street, for example. Are you saying that 41st Street could actually fit a full service 30,000 square foot grocery store, one level
They have room for that. Mhm.
with parking? All good.
Ready to go build
Yeah.
it, Malcolm? You'll be a hero. in that.
For the sake of the people north of I-5.
No, so I looked at, actually specifically looked at that site and a grocery store, and Ralph's Thriftway with all of its parking would actually fit on that site pretty comfortably.
The same route that we saw the aerial photo of?
Yeah.
That would fit on that spot?
Not to say that it would necessarily, that scale of a grocery store would work at that location, but purely from a construction standpoint, it would fit.
Oh, wow.
So
Make it happen.
there is a lot of room in a lot of these districts to accommodate a lot of combinations of these.
Does this sound like we're going in the right direction?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, okay.
We also looked at building heights. I'm gonna try to keep moving here. Currently, it's 35 feet. By comparison, moderate density is 40, high density residential is up to 80. I'm not gonna really talk about high density residential, but again, 35 feet is comparatively on that kind of lower density, more suburban style of development,
Mhm.
and that's what we're seeing in practice.
What's the height on the reserve?
Reserve is, I believe, is
75.
70. I think it's the height allowance.
It's under
is-
80.
Yeah,
Okay.
How many stories is that?
it's four. They took a story off.
Yeah.
Mhm.
in
Should have been
their-
5.
Yeah, because they got into trouble with interest rates.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember that.
If we were to allow, 80, right, does that present us more
Well, what-
opportunity
So-
for developers? Is that-
Six-story
I would,
building on
I would
6th
push
Street.
back on 80 a little bit. I think that these are still our lowest kind of intensity form of commercial designation that we have within the city. So there are a range of different commercial types of districts within the city. This is really kind of intended to be the least intense.
Four story seems that it would fit really well there, but if you had,
We could go.
I mean, you see a ton of mixed use, I mean, sure, a ton of them, so I see them every day, but
Yeah,
first floor retail, 3 stories above it, I mean, that's just,
Right.
that's
yeah.
the common building that we're seeing right now in, in more in
We have a ladder
in
truck
urban
there.
areas.
That wouldn't work on Willamette Drive, but it might work on
Yeah.
41st.
So with a 35-foot height limit, really best case scenario, you're gonna see a 2-story building.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is fine, but it's not quite the feedback that we're getting. I mean, that's still relatively small, kind of single family style scale, honestly. So-
To.
We're going the wrong way here.
4 stories.
But so some of the recommendations that we're looking at is bumping that up to 40 feet, which would accommodate a 3-story building. But then also with the opportunity to increase to 55, provided the top 2 stories are residential.
Okay,
And then there are additional requirements as far as when these buildings are located immediately adjacent to single-family residential. That there's additional buffering, setbacks, step backs, things like that to soften that kind of intense kind of use interaction there. Yeah, so still trying to maintain that privacy, say somebody's single-family home with their backyard backs up against one of these. We want to be mindful of that because these really are neighborhood style commercial developments. So in that setting, there are some additional kind of ideas there as far as how to soften that, but at the same time still encourage and allow for additional height. And then that additional kind of floor in the event that somebody wants to do maybe ground floor, commercial, and then residential above it. That's kind of the direction we're going there.
Yep. I like it.
I'm not saying I like it because it's 8:30, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I like it, period.
Proposed frontage changes, this is the last part of really the design element side of things. a lot of this, actually, I think all of this is pulled from our woodland districts. And really kind of gets into the character a little bit more. So it has to do with kind of weather protection, so awnings, things like that. And kind of uniformity in design and character. Has to do with kind of windows and kind of how much of the store frontage is made up of windows. And being oriented towards the street and things like that. And then primary entry doors being oriented again towards the sidewalk, towards the street, not towards a potential parking lot in the back, that kind of thing. So maybe making sure that there's really that forward facing street connection is really what all this is about. And then permitted uses. So we did, I did want to throw this in really quick. This is some of the feedback that we heard early on was exploring the differences between north and south of I-5 specifically, and are there really dramatic differences between the neighborhood commercial districts that are north of I-5 versus south of I-5? Looking at the feedback that we got, we did ask some location specific questions, so we were able to sort based on where that feedback was coming from. Themes that really had kind of a northern polarity or kind of were prominently featured and more commonly so with people that live north of I-5 included things like grocery stores, gas stations, Meridian Market specifically, because there's a lot of feedback that came in from directly around that location. And then trucks and kind of that modal conflict. And a lot of that, honestly, when we were looking at the larger feedback, had to do with the warehouses that are out there, and not necessarily so much feedback specific to neighborhood commercial districts, but it was feedback that we heard more consistently from folks to the north of I-5 than the south. That said, accessibility and human scale was consistent throughout all the feedback that we heard. Supportive infrastructure, so making sure that there's sidewalks, bike lanes, bike parking, kind of larger sidewalks, that kind of thing was consistent throughout. Making sure that the types of uses that go in do really kind of maintain that local emphasis. They don't have a regional draw, but they really are kind of targeting their primary clientele is kind of the immediate neighborhood surrounding them. And then architectural compatibility. So they didn't want kind of harsh changes between residential and commercial uses. When you hit that, when you transition from a residential block to a commercial one, that it's all still kind of generally compatible and consistent. We brought this also to the planning commission, and then with our kind of newly kind of transitioned emphasis towards more of a design and form based approach, the need to create that north-south separation wasn't as strong. So they actually recommended for consistency that we would kind of do one code that really applies uniformly across all of the city.
I have a problem with that. I really think that each one of these areas is should be its own sub-district, because what the community is looking for in say number 2 may not be what the community is looking for in number 8. And that is really based on the characteristics of the surrounding community. And I think it's up to sort of each sub-district to figure out what works there based on the surrounding community and community input. And we shouldn't put a blanket over all of this and say one size fits all, I don't care where you're at. Because we know there's several different characteristics where these what I think should be called sub-districts within this. And I think that works a lot better, right? Because we know for a fact
They're not all the same.
they're not all the same. We know for a fact in number 2 or 3, they're not wanting any more gas stations. But maybe they do in number 6. And so why would we?
And I do want to follow up, is that more from a use perspective or a general kind of character perspective?
I think it's come from a character perspective, right? Because these are all, I mean, 4 and 5 is a little bit closer to, and 6 and 7 is a little bit closer, right? Than to 2 and 3. I mean, so you could almost do, sub-districts based on 2 and 3. 4 and 5, 6 and 8 and set, right? You can do it that way, but I wouldn't go one size fits all.
I think you could do more of what's not allowed in certain areas than you can what is allowed, because I think it's very clear what you don't want in certain areas.
Grant, you have
Yeah, just to, this is the conversation we really wanted to hear from you tonight, specifically. And I just want to say Hans has done a great job of trying to keep things at the visioning level and not coming up with code immediately that we think implements it, but showing the community and the council and the planning commission iterations of what things look like those blocks, you know, the different, what things might look like on the ground. And now we're getting into the nitty gritty where we're getting into the design elements and the uses. And so I just wanted to thank the council for the feedback tonight, but also kind of get into that because I think that is one of the things in this hybrid form-based code use direction that we're headed that Rick alluded to is we do need to do some broad looks at what use where. And the direction we were headed was looking at each district fairly individually or as much as we can and building in design standards specific to certain areas. And if the council agrees with that, we'll continue to kind of push that with the planning commission.
I was gonna say, Nick, what you just brought up, I think made a lot of sense. So if you did it kind of broad stroke like you're talking about, right? Because it gets pretty complicated if we're doing completely different for each of them. I get that. But you could then go in and say, not allowed uses or, you know, allowed in specific ones, right? You could say, this is the basic code, but in one, you know, in that one that we label as one gas station as an example, and not necessarily have that as a distinguishing factor in 8.
And there is an example of that too, referring to the Martinway corridor. You have the west, central, and east, and each one of those have different emphasis of what, based on kind of the existing situation.
Yeah, I was thinking north, south, and central.
Because the central is more auto oriented, west and the east have a little bit different scale.
As long as we're heading in that direction, I'm okay with it. I think it's better that we do look at each district on its own, and then let's come up with what looks like will fit there and not fit there. But like, we know for a fact, we shouldn't put any more gas stations in 2 and 3, right? I mean,
Well, I think 1, 2, and 3 are all kind of one.
yeah, well,
district.
So we do have,
Councilmember Vasquez, you have a.
It sounds like we're maybe going in the direction of not creating specific definitions for every single one, but rather identifying prohibited uses
in some.
in some.
so the last section we do have is our uses.
Mhm.
And gas stations is one of them. And I'll show you what I did there, because that might actually address a lot of what we're talking about right now. On a high level, real quickly though, from the design stuff that we talked about so far, does that seem to make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Across all districts?
That looks great.
Okay, so
Design
that,
standards are perfect.
yeah, so moving into specifically allowed uses. We're moving away from trying to name and anticipate every single type of use that might come along, including film development and video rental stores, which are still in our code today. And doing
Another blockbuster.
more umbrella categories. So instead of trying to list everything, listing residential is allowed use. And then we do have a couple potential caveats underneath that. So right now, as our code's written, it's residential above ground floor commercial is the only scenario where residential is currently permitted. And taking a step back from that, looking at potentially allowing it on the ground floor with the caveat that there's at least 1,500 square feet of commercial space. So really the intent of residential, yes, we want more residential, but yes, we also want it to support the primary intent of these districts specifically, which is commercial. So finding a way to allow those types of ground floor uses, provided that they're still meeting that baseline requirement for commercial development. And then the additional benefit there is that, again, these can locate around the periphery of these districts and soften that transition from commercial to residential zones. And then circling back around to the live work, we did want to encourage that, but as you're kind of, maybe you were hinting out your experiences with Serenity, it should be able to accomplish some of that required minimum commercial space, but we don't want it to be entirely that. We still want to have some anchor style tenants, maybe some larger ones, and then kind of along the edge, maybe some of those smaller individual boxes. So that's kind of where we were circling with for residential. Food related ones, pretty much pretty open here. So brew pubs, public houses, eating and drinking, and definitely grocery stores. The one detail I wanted to highlight here is drive-throughs. So allowing drive-throughs as an accessory use to specifically pharmacies, bakeries, cafes and coffee shops, as a accessory use to those only, but not other types of uses.
Okay.
And really the emphasis there is that they still have an indoor kind of gathering component to them with the exception.
So
of the
you'd
pharmacy.
allow it for a bakery, but you wouldn't allow it for a fast food restaurant, is what you're saying?
Correct. And this is kind of a code way or a form-based approach to kind of limit
Making sure you don't
maybe
get
more of
fast
the
food.
larger chain style uses,
Yeah,
but
those
definitely
shortages
still
are-
allowing those local kind of characteristic ones.
They're everywhere.
And then the additional element here is not permitted between the street and the building. So when a drive-through does take place, it's located kind of on the side or on the back. So that street building interaction is still kind of encouraged. So, Dan?
Kind of like we see with
Sneezing or?
kind of like we see with miso and
Yeah.
over, yeah.
Around the back of the pharmacy, around the back.
And then moving into commercial, again, really kind of high level, allowing most things provided they are in line with the design elements that we've already discussed. But things like medical and health, community and civic facilities, commercial, professional, services, offices, retail, that it's primarily in person, direct to customers, so we don't want to kind of either, and then services, activities must occur primarily within the building, so we don't want a whole lot of kind of mechanics or outdoor kind of sales, that kind of thing. Still kind of smaller, kind of shop oriented in kind of their character. And then rooftop solar was something that's come up previously, but as an accessory use, that was something that we wanted to make sure that we encouraged. Because these locations are typically within residential areas that could really actually benefit from that potential partnership there, so. And then the last one is gas stations. So there's kind of two different schools of thought here. One, we are
Convenience stores is
soon to have 2 gas stations that will exist within our commercial districts. And we don't want to outright prohibit existing uses that are already there today. So finding that balance of allowing what's already currently there, but maybe not encouraging it moving forward. So there's 2 different kind of ways to approach that. Gas fueling stations as an accessory use to a full service grocery store. Provided a grocery store goes in, the feedback that we've heard seems to still be amenable to a gas station, provided they get that grocery store. I think the grocery store does outweigh the gas station kind of balance, yeah. Priority for a grocery store outweighs the negative perceptions of a gas station. And then the other one here is not less than 1.5 street miles from another station. That right there effectively eliminates all other neighborhood commercial districts from having a gas station that don't currently have one today or in the near future once Meridian Market. So
You
by,
did on all 8 of them? That
yeah,
would work?
looking at all 8 of them, that right there effectively makes it. So a gas
That
station
includes
won't
the future UGA ones though, that would be fit this
Haven't-
district.
looked at those. I can look at those again, but
Be close, I think.
yeah, so this way it effectively kind of is that north-south, but taking it from a different approach. So it accomplishes that limiting gas stations, but at the same time still allows them either as an accessory use, or if one of the existing one goes away, then there might be a scenario where a new one could come in. So it doesn't prohibit what's already there today, but also limits that type of use moving forward instead
It
of.
accomplishes what we need to accomplish. I
Yeah,
think.
so it might be a way that kind of hits on that north-south concept without it being just what side of I-5 are you on or what district are you in specifically before we can make a determination on that. The other big thing here is that we got rid of all conditional uses. So everything we've talked about
Oh,
is
good.
permitted. So there's, provided you meet all of our design requirements
Perfect.
and you're in one of those categories, there's no figuring it out whether or not that's an allowed use based on the process that we kind of went through.
Good.
Um,
Conditional use.
Yeah, and then there are some additional limitations here that we did throw in as far as the scale of these gas stations, so number of fueling stations in proximity to residential uses and other things like that, but
Is it 4?
yeah. So 2 fueling stations, I should say, serving no more than 4 vehicles at any one time.
The current gas stations that are
That's
built,
2.
do they all
Parking
fit
side.
within that?
So the gas stations fit within the top
Right, so
bullet and the 2
each
sub bullets,
station seems
and then the stacking lanes and the pump islands they fit. The 2 fueling stations was something that could have been required, but wasn't as part of those. So the 2 that are, the one that's is on its way and the one that's currently constructed are larger than that. But in a general sense, as a general use, they would still be consistent with our code as it's proposed.
That
So-
pretty much eliminates, I mean, does
Yeah.
anybody actually build a gas station with only 2? I mean, because it's got 2, right? Cause you got a car on each side, so that's 4 cars. And can't think of any gas station that small
There used to
that's
be
been
those
built in the last
back in the
15
nineties.
years. I said that's been built in the last
Yeah.
15
They
years.
used to.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we wouldn't just outright prohibit gas stations from future development is that if one of the existing spots needed to do substantial renovations, then it would
Yes.
suddenly be
Right.
against the rules and they wouldn't qualify for something that had already been
So-
previously built. So if we create this limitation of two fueling stations, does that impact? If gas stations want to do substantial redevelopment, will they actually have to shrink?
That could, because because one of the things that creates a grant for them, that goes back to looking at various, location, neighborhood commercial locations, look at the context, so.
Yeah, I have a real problem with that, because what you're encouraging then is them never to make any updates. They're
Never reinvest.
They're never reinvesting in that property, because if they've got 4 fueling stations now, they're not gonna go down to 2, which means if building can become dilapidated, they're never going to spend.
And
any
if you look
money.
at this site here, this neighbor commercial site, it's distinctly different in context than some of the other sites that we have in our.
Well, and that's why we
They
maybe
should
need
be able
to
to match
look
what
at
they got,
specific
please.
sites. That's why I think we should maybe look at specific sites in this circumstance, and current allowed uses in that site might be different than other ones.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with this except for
Yeah.
the idea of the existing ones. I'm fine with it. A new one wants to open.
Yeah,
great. That
exactly.
Discourages a new one.
The existing
And I
ones,
like
they
the
should be able to
1.5
match.
miles, actually, that eliminates any new ones anyway. But if the existing ones need to do a major renovation
Yeah,
to
they should be able to
whatever
do that.
triggers the new code, that's a problem. Forcing someone out of
We,
business.
we go back to the bottom floor residential, possibly, having that be a use. I would like to see a certain percentage be at least elderly or people with disabilities,
Well,
if we're gonna allow it.
what I think we should do is when we're looking about allowing it, that is a possible use, and also low income. Like if we're gonna allow residential in these areas on the ground floor, there should be some benefit to the overall district, and that's.
If you have a disability, you're on the ground floor already, you don't have to use the
Right.
stairs or.
Yeah, well, and if we're
Yeah.
talking about creating incentives to increase the footprint of the size of the building, maybe decrease the amount of parking, maybe that's one of those incentives, where if you're building guaranteed affordable housing or disability accessible housing, then you can build a bigger footprint and decrease the square footage of the
Bigger.
parking you have.
Yeah,
Are we gonna say how far below market we want these? Are we
I
talking
think there
80?
is a definition.
60, 80?
Yeah,
We'd have
for
to-
low income, like the legal definition for low income is what, 30?
Yeah, well,
30% of the medium house, yeah.
it's the low income piece is if you council and the planning commission, all that comes up to the final recommendation, we'd have to set parameters of what that qualification would be, what would be the reporting requirements, because you also add that into an annual report to make sure that they maintain that low income status.
What percentage of it has to be
And-
low income?
Yeah.
qualify,
And
all
we've had
that.
one project on Martin Way East, the old Rancho Motel site, the Gateway Apartments. They did a bonus density and they used 10% of those units as low income, so they're entering into a annual reporting process, so we have some baseline there that can be looked at.
well, I'd recommend that we move in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just one more thing on the
Yeah, sure.
gas stations. Is there any envisioning as we move more toward electrifying vehicles? About what happens to these gas stations? And it seems logical to me that some of them may want to convert to charging stations. And
Is that allowed use?
Charging stations isn't allowed use. It's also typically not a primary use, so it takes place in existing
Yes.
parking stalls.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily, so right now we're talking about kind of commercial primary uses. And any one of these commercial uses could go ahead and install charging stations within their required parking stalls.
Great.
So, yeah, rarely do you see charging stations as the primary use of a location.
Well, I think what you're talking about though is the future, right?
Yeah.
Is where,
absolutely down the road.
well, and that's, I think that's why everything has to be, there's always flexibility in whatever we do, right? Because market will change.
Mhm.
Markets change before we've made changes. That's why we have all the warehouses that we do and all the
Yeah.
jobs we have in Northeast Lacey, because
And
we're
that's
changing.
also why we're moving away from specifically listing each commercial use and just saying commercial uses, provided they meet the design elements
Yeah.
are permitted. Is,
More flexible than
yeah,
defining.
so it is really responsive to the unknown future without having to predict what that exact use is gonna be.
Well, I think we're heading in the right direction.
Okay.
One
Go ahead.
Got more slides?
One more, this is it. This is it. So we got rid of conditional uses, but we do have a few prohibited uses. These are essentially everything that's not listed within what we've just ran through. And then also, we heard a lot of feedback about stacking lanes and kind of idling vehicles and trying to move those away from residential. So we wanted to make sure that that was captured. Outdoor storage and repair, we talked about that a little bit, but again, that's not really the type of commercial uses that we're looking for within these districts. And then warehousing and mini storage are all specifically identified as prohibited uses.
Okay.
So we either have permitted or prohibited, but no gray area in the middle.
I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Discussion.
So thank you. I'll just wrap up real quick. Thank you, Hans. That's
Good job,
great
Hans.
conversation. As you can tell, there's been a lot of work that's gone into this point. We're only 3/4 of the way through the process. So the next step is to go back out to the planning commission, I believe tomorrow night. To read on Wednesdays now. That's kind of weird to get used to. And so they're gonna start that process and bring back a recommendation to the council. One thing I do want to follow up on is Councilmember Dunning's question about who makes these decisions. And one of the things, and we can go into a little bit later in a future meeting, but just a quick summary. Once this recommendations come forward, it'll be adopted into the neighborhood commercial zoning chapter. And as Hans mentioned really early in his presentation, we have other codes that relate to land use development that are design review. There are other places in the LMC. But typically, land use projects go through a process where our staff review those permits. They look at in parameters of the codes, the zoning codes that we're creating. And if they fit within them, then they process it through and you'll reach those conditional approvals. If it's something that triggers a higher level review like quasi judicial, it would go to a hearing examiner, conditional use permits, preliminary plats, subdivisions, those type of things would go up to that larger hearing examiner process. And the hearing examiner will be taking recommendations from the staff, hearing the public and making a decision based on the rules and guidelines in the zoning code. Now, what's being proposed in this process is to remove the conditional use permits from the neighborhood commercial. So neighborhood commercial, it would mainly be a staff review, making sure any project comes forward is in concert with the rules, the codes that are going to be ultimately adopted by the council.
So this is great for neighborhood commercials. I guess, I think what we might need to do is take some lessons learned from this process and maybe take a look at our other zoning and see if we might want to include some of this thinking in our other zoning, right? Because you look at that map, I mean, we're very limited on where this is at. But I would like to see some of these design standards and elements throughout maybe some of our other zoning throughout the city. But I don't know where that is on the map. I mean, this council doesn't know where, what's allowed, where, what,
We
and
need to spend
right?
a work session really
So-
on the current zones and.
yeah. And so my suggestion is great work on this process, but maybe once we get through, we need to probably start taking the next step and looking at some of these other zones and have and seeing where we can maybe take some of what we learned here and push it on those other areas as well. Right?
And the thing I think you answered right, because like the design, being a little more design based, I think is better, because when you talk about whatever the use is gonna be, that person who lives in that community is drive by it every day, they're probably much more concerned with how it blends in with the rest of the community. So if it's very design focused, eventually, as long as it blends in, I think, it's gonna match well and they're gonna be happy with whatever goes there.
And go back to that Briggs example, the Briggs Town Center. I mentioned that's a different thing, but it's a great example of what it could look like in neighborhood without the master planning piece of it. And I think Grant was gonna have something to add related to the mayor's comments on
Grant?
the process.
Yeah, thank you. It is our full intention in the comp plan update process to, at the same time, take a look at our development regulations and try to bring them up to the same level of good policy that the comp plan has been kept at over the years. So it's in our work program to take a look at those development regulations. And like, I think when we started the neighborhood commercial update process, we kind of pitched it as preview of the comp plan, the overall comp plan update process. And I think the preview also includes kind of the how it's implemented piece. So don't be surprised if you see more of this kind of stuff in the future as we go through the comp plan update process.
But keep in mind, residential alone has several different zonings, categories, whatever, so.
That's music to my ears for sure. Okay, I think we're heading in the right direction.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Great job. Thank you.
Good job, man.
For sitting through
Wow.
that with me.
I'm gonna deep dive.
We're not even too, we're way over on time.
Yeah, no, it's
Never, no more
glad you had
glad get used to longer meetings.
Good conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Want me to lead off?
Yeah, you lead off.
All right. So,
For your 4 hour.
if I can get the council's attention, we'll try to, get the next two items fairly quickly. We got two more items. They're fairly short, but I wanted to kind of set up this next conversation, which is the assignment of the intergovernmental committees. As with process per the council's policies and procedure manual. The first meeting in January is when the list goes out to ask for preferences of committee assignments, and then the second meeting in January is where those will be confirmed. And so the mayor sent out the request at the last council meeting for preferences to be provided by each of the council members. We took those preferences and kind of worked, worked with the mayor and put it into an updated matrix of what those are gonna look like. So the matrix just was passed out around to the council members. Up at the very top, just as a quick reference, is each of the council members and the number of primary intergovernmental committee assignments they have based on that matrix. I didn't put the alternates because that's something we just want to focus on the primary, that's where the bulk of the work is. A couple of things I want to point out in conversations with various council members and the mayor over the last several months. There are a couple of intergovernmental committees want to make sure that council wants to make that deliberate decision of do we still need to be involved or not. And one of those is the Community Action Council. It's currently pending. That's, we have some further conversation about what is that role of a council representative on that?
And the reason why we bring this up and we didn't plug people back in, right now, it seems like there's no other cities involved on this in the CAC. Is that right?
Action Council.
They had a mass resignation about 3 months ago of various bodies, and I've been trying to reach out to their current executive director to see what the makeup of their board is, and I haven't been able to connect yet.
And so right now, we're gonna sort of leave it blank if Community Action Council and the other jurisdictions at some point decide to get back involved, then we'll take a look at this, but for now, we're gonna leave that blank pending.
And the other,
Yes.
so Sarah Miranda is now the interim CEO and just haven't been able to connect with her. The other one is the Lacey South Sound Chamber. That's kind of developed into a kind of an ad hoc or a committee rep. I think it was passed, it started with past council member Hearn. One of the things I need to talk to with the chamber, because that is not necessarily on the South Sound Chamber's board. It's just being attendant and creating, attending the forums and those type of things. So I kind of want to flesh out what that really looks like and what that means for council members. They want to be a primary representative, or is that something just?
Either of the people, no one that I know of that from our council that has had that position was on the board.
Right, they showed up to forums and then,
Yeah.
usually they're already members.
Well, at one point, you were on the board and representative, so.
But it was for a short period, it was only like a year.
So here's the conversation and why it's pending now. We're gonna engage with the executive director and their board to see if there is a space for Lacey to be on the board,
Yeah.
which would change this, right? If Lacey,
If you really want,
if we were
to be
to-
a part, yeah.
right, they need to be on the board, and if they're on the board, then that changes everything, but that's the decision the South Sound, the chamber we need to have ongoing discussions with them. And if that's the case, then it makes sense. As it is, it doesn't make a lot of sense unless there was an official board member part of it, then okay.
And what's that role and what that purpose and how
Yeah.
do you work with those people? So,
And so that's why there's those two are pending.
and then the other one is what I draw attention to, and I talked with Deputy Mayor earlier today about is the 13 County Coalition Against Human Trafficking. I did some looking, I haven't seen any new information or postings on their Facebook page since 2022. But I have it still on here because there's no official, it's not a part of a standardized committee yet, but I just want to draw that attention is that one also might be something as we find out more information, it may not be relevant. I'll let Deputy Mayor speak to his experience.
It may fall off. I reached out to Rose Gunderson and Kira to find out, hey, what's the status, where we at? Because I haven't heard from them in like at least 9 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know Rose was kind of busy there for a while on other things. So some of the decisions I made on this is if someone, I've always tried to accommodate this, is if someone's going to leadership on a specific board, I always try to make sure that person continues to stay on that board. For example, with the EDC, the deputy mayor looks like he's gonna be, the president of the EDC. And so that's why I did that with Robin. I think there's been talk about you being the chair of TRPC.
Maybe
So
figure out on Friday.
we'll figure it out on Friday, but it sounds like so, and that's why I did that. So I made some of that decision making based on where leadership is. Lenny's been in leadership a lot for his, he needs to stay on his, right? So that's where I've made some decision making on that.
RHC
Yeah. So
chair.
does everything look good for this?
JASCOM will be new for me.
Yeah.
Very interested to see how that can place with Monday Night Football.
Which one?
JASCOM.
Are we still some football?
We're still in public meeting.
That's not for another 8 months.
Yeah, that's a long time
Let's
away.
look into the future.
Okay, there, but if everything seems good, there's maybe some other conversation we have, but this is what I will propose going forward at next Thursday for adoption. And I think what we'll do is we'll just put it into the consent agenda. I mean, there's perfect.
Perfect consent.
Okay. Okay, great.
We'll
Last-
have Alyssa come up for electronic voting.
Last but not least.
Chair's gonna.
Okay, good evening. We are gonna dive right in and be brief.
Is this a interactive illustration or?
It's not planned to be.
Okay.
What's more interaction?
No.
Quite a bit
wondering if
tonight,
I need
that's
to-
Do we have the yes or no on example of it on the word question? Okay.
All right, so we are implementing our electronic voting. So with that, we are, this is already covered in your council policies and procedures. So votes that will be cast in an audible tone of voice or by casting their vote electronically using a city-approved platform. Currently, Civic Clerk is our only city-approved platform, and that is what we will be using to cast electronic voting options. A council member who casts their vote electronically using the city-approved platform must have internet connection. Obviously, if you are here in City Hall, that is taken care of. So if you are remote, just make sure that you are using your city-issued device to access the Civic Clerk board portal. We strongly encourage that an audible vote is cast alongside an electronic vote, both in person and for remote options. This will assist the public with transparency, accessibility, as well as the clerk tallying those votes.
Great.
So quick review of the Civic Clerk Board portal. Most of you are very familiar with this. If you are logged in to the board portal, you will see the join meeting option and where you will be able to select a present voting roll call function. This will automatically update the clerk's attendance for roll call and allow you to cast electronic vote. If you are not doing this currently, I do it on the back end. I see that you're here. You're still present, and voting. But it will tie into the electronic vote portion. So once logged in and joined a meeting, when a motion is made, seconded, and a vote is called for, I will push a button and that will pop up on your city issued iPads. Council can then still call for your yays, any opposed, still including an audible vote with an electronic vote. But you can select your vote and click save, and that will immediately pop up and register for platform.
Will it actually say vote for current item, or will the item be there?
It should, so right below the current item, it will have the title section. So this says approval of agenda and consent agenda items. So that is what you're voting on. So it will pull the title. It won't give the full language of the motion, but you will know what item you are voting under.
Will it show up on the screen for folks that we have in the public?
The selection piece will not, but that does lead into the next slide, so thank you. So the public display. So we, in order to not cast a secret ballot, obviously we're not all voting just electronically only, but we do have the public display. We're using this now. This does not only tie to electronic votes. This does get displayed on the screen that is behind the clerk station at the dais, but it also gets preserved as part of the meeting record when you go back and visit past meetings. So all the motions and the votes, and here we have the Commission on Equity as an example where they adopted the agenda and consent items. This is how it will display for the public.
And if there were no votes, it would show who voted no on there
Yes,
as well?
yep. And it will show if it passed or failed up here in the right-hand corner.
And this will show up online when they're watching it through social media or other stuff.
Yes.
Is a recusal the same as abstaining?
Yeah, for the port, yes. Yep.
Yes.
If you hit that leave meeting, that means we can get up and go.
That means tonight, and yeah, so the leave meeting part, I think some of you are aware that you can, you were in the past able to stay and joined in a meeting that was, well, in the past, that has no, like, they've updated that. So after the 24-hour period or that day, you will auto leave. That was an issue with not being able to join 2 meetings at once, so that is no longer there. But
Couldn't figure out why I couldn't get into the next meeting, yeah.
so with that, we plan on implementing this next week. So you should see this when you are logged in to the board portal. I will be around before the meeting to make sure if there are any questions or issues or troubles getting logged into the portal. We want to make sure you have a saved bookmark on your iPad and accessing the Civic Clerk board portal to be able to opt into this.
I guess there's no more.
So
When the vote's called, right?
on the, did you vote? On the adjourn,
Mhm.
in some cases, so I always say without objection, I'm gonna call this meeting adjourned. Will there have to be a vote to adjourn?
There's not a motion being casted or a second,
Okay.
so for that portion, no. This is only for when a motion is made, seconded, and a vote is
Okay.
called.
Okay, but if someone didn't want to adjourn,
I
Did
object.
you would object, and then there'd have to be a vote.
Then there'd be a motion,
Well, David, yep,
Motion.
yeah.
then there would be a
Then
motion.
then you would pull that up.
Yes, yep, so when a vote takes place,
I'll leave yet.
and so there may be some, just slight delays, so kind of just some pauses as we go from one item immediately to another, just to make sure that all the buttons and things are in the right place.
Most of the times online, you have a 3-second delay or something like that.
That's why I
For
really
you,
like this,
when
because
you're
people it's one thing in person, but the people that when someone's on, on Zoom for the meeting and they vote, sometimes they're not voting until you've said, any
Yeah.
opposed, even though they meant to vote yay. By the time we hear them, because of that delay,
Yeah.
like, did they vote yay? or
Yeah.
Okay,
We can still vote verbally, or do we need?
we still are gonna vote
We,
verbally.
yeah, we strongly encourage an audible vote to accompany an electronic vote.
Okay, great. nothing more than an audible is required if you're there.
Correct. You do not have to vote electronically. So if you still cast an audible vote only, I will make the selection electronically and it will still display on the public as you have voted.
Okay,
Would it be helpful if we did both?
but it'd be helpful, yes, but please do vote.
Yeah,
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
it would, yes.
Just don't vote yay and hit nay,
One selection and thing.
or vice versa.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
We're here to help, so we'll.
yeah, so we'll go through this next meeting, hopefully we'll figure it out, we'll do it on the fly, and obviously,
I'll check in with you all before the meeting just to see, I can see who's logged in. So that is something that,
it'll just pop up in the middle, and you're just gonna hit right in the middle of the screen, huh?
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Should be.
With
There's only
that,
three choices.
we have reached the end of our agenda, so without objection, I'll call this meeting adjourned. And as always,
Thinking about objecting.
Yeah.
you keep it classy, Lacey.
Gotta do it before the gavel falls.
Need meeting.
Getting loopy. We're trying to extend the agenda.
Yep.
This the question is, why would anyone ever object? Just don't wanna leave?
If you haven't gone through all the business.